Hogwarts. Voldemort, don't stop me from studying. Chapter 21. No matter what the reason is, the increase in time spent together will cause subtle changes in people's relationships. Some will become closer and closer, such as Vader and his SSC companions. Some will become more and more hostile. For example, Potter and Malfoy, their noob pecking each other has become a scene in Hogwarts. In the evening, Wade and Michael returned to the Ravenclaw lounge, once again stuck at the curfew time. As soon as they entered, Michael was called away by two girls. Tomorrow is Halloween, the students are very excited, and there is something going on in the lounge. A small party is held, and Michael is one of the few first-year students invited. The upperclassmen bought a lot of butterbeer, rum and whiskey during the weekend at Hogsmeade, and there was a heady smell filling the common room. Michael wanted to drag Wade over, but he waved his hand and refused. Wade had always been indifferent to such gatherings. Last time, he saw two people he didn't know well kissing passionately on the sofa after drinking too much. A bunch of people around were applauding and cheering, drinking beer and spilling it, giving off an atmosphere of drunkenness and indulgence. Although Wade has lived in the West for 11 years, his thoughts are still reserved and reserved. He is much more cautious about feelings and physical contact than his classmates. Walking back to the dormitory along the spiral staircase, the dormitory is as clean and tidy as ever. The clothes I changed out yesterday have been washed, ironed, and neatly stacked in the closet. There is also a pot of boiled water on the desk, which is steaming. Wade poured himself a glass. The temperature in his mouth was just right. The long table at Hogwarts usually only has various fruit juices, vegetable juices or hot chocolate, and students usually drink raw water directly. Wade was not used to this. Some time ago, he tentatively left a note on his dirty clothes, saying that he hoped to drink hot water when he returned to the dormitory. The next morning, when he got up, he found a steaming pot of black tea on his desk. The house elves probably didn't quite understand what hot water was, and maybe no one had ever made such a request to them. So Wade added another sentence, "Thank you for the black tea. But what I want is hot water obtained by boiling water directly without adding tea leaves." From that day on, no matter when he returned to the dormitory, there was always a pot of hot water waiting for him, and it was the same when he got up in the morning. It has to be said that at least half of the comfort of life in Hogwarts is brought by house elves. Before going to bed, Wade placed 3 mini pumpkin carriages on the table, which he made using the transformation technique. There was also a small lantern the size of a bean hanging in front of the carriage, emitting a bright green light. 2. Zoe, Phil, Happy. Thank you for your dedicated service. This is a Halloween gift for you. Wish you Happy Halloween. When I woke up early in the morning, it was already Halloween, and the whole castle was filled with the smell of roasted pumpkins. The pumpkin carriage on the desk has disappeared, replaced by a new pot of hot water, a plate of pumpkin cookies, a handful of flowers and a pile of beautiful pebbles. The heart-shaped biscuits are fragrant, the flowers are still covered with dewdrops, and the thumb-sized pebbles look like gems. These are all carefully prepared return gifts by the house elves. Vader couldn't help but laugh. He didn't mind that the elves' gifts were too cheap. The house elves all belong to Hogwarts, and they owned nothing except the tea towels they wore, and even the tea towels actually belonged to Hogwarts. Halloween was not a holiday. There was a charms class early in the morning. Professor Flitwick divided the students into pairs to practice the levitation spell. Vader and Anthony Goldstein were divided into a group. "Don't forget that subtle wrist movement we have been training," Professor Flitwick said sharply. "One wave and one flick. Remember, the wrist must be waved and flicked. It is also very important to recite the spell accurately. Don't forget about Wizard Barufio, who said the F instead of an S, and found himself lying on the floor with a bison standing on his chest." The students all started chanting, Yingadim Leviosa. The feathers in front of Vader immediately fluttered up. He had already used this spell many times in the Umbrella House, mainly to move tables and chairs. Hermione and Michael also succeeded one after another, and Professor Flitwick was happy. He clapped his hands and said, "Well done, I'll give you 2 points, everyone." Then a scene that surprised everyone even more appeared. The feathers in front of Neville fluttered tremblingly, floating 2 feet above him like a turbulent boat in the waves. The Gryffindors' eyes almost popped out of their heads in surprise, because Neville had always been clumsy no matter what class he was in, and no one except Professor Sprout would praise him. Moreover, the floating spell is very difficult for young wizards, and the feathers in front of most of them remain motionless. So seeing Neville use the levitation charm, albeit less successfully, was almost as shocking as seeing a troll do ballet. Great, great Mr. Longbottom! Professor Flitwick screamed and jumped in surprise. 5 points for Gryffindor. Isn't it right that Longbottom succeeded? Wade heard Anthony beside him say in surprise, and then he cast the spell over and over again, but the feather still didn't move. Anthony was a tall, strong boy, and he had no problem reciting the incantation, but the detailed and subtle movements of waving and shaking were too difficult for him. He practiced over and over again, and his movements became more and more deformed. Wait, seeing that he was about to poke the wand into the back of the head of the student in the front row, Wade grabbed his wrist and said, "Try this." He drew a steep curve like a sine wave on the paper, and marked the direction with an arrow, marking where it should be faster next to it. After zooming in, it floated in front of him, and said to Anthony, "Wave the wand according to this line, and don't go beyond the range." Quote. Anthony didn't question it. As both Ravenclaws, they all knew that Vader's spell skills were the best in his grade. The blonde boy first made silent gestures to himself, then waved his wand. Yingadim Leviosa. The feathers immediately floated up, flying higher and higher under Anthony's command, even touching the chandelier overhead. Anthony looked on with surprise, almost reluctant to put down his wand. Terry Budd and Lavender Brown, who were sitting on the left and right of them, looked at each other and stretched out their hands almost at the same time. Finally, Lavender used her superior agility to grab the parchment and pull it in front of her group. Yingadim Leviosa. On the right side of the classroom, more and more feathers were floating, which naturally attracted the attention of Professor Flitwick. As soon as Lisa Dupin grabbed the parchment, she saw a small palm pulling the parchment away from below. Professor Flitwick took a look and said with a smile, "Oh, a very clever way of guidance." Professor Flitwick took a look and said, "Oh, a very clever way of guiding, although it is a shortcut, it can really help you master this spell faster. Wade, this must be your idea." Wade bent his eyes and showed a bright smile. Professor Flitwick, who was originally serious, also smiled. He waved his wand and copied the parchment 10 times, so that each group could have one, and warned, "This is a reference, but you must really master it. I will take back the parchment in 10 minutes. I hope that you will have mastered the levitation spell by then. Students who can make the feather float, why don't you try to make it turn in the air?" The students in the classroom started practicing again, and Professor Flitwick walked around to guide. Wade directed his feather to draw a circle in the air for a while, and then drew a square, and then began to recite the poem. Anthony looked at it with envy, but he didn't aim too high, but continued to practice the levitation spell over and over again. After class, the Gryffindors rushed to their History of Magic class. The Ravenclaws had no other classes in the morning, and Wade went to the library as usual. Michael was going to go with him, but he was stopped before he got up. "Hi, Michael." His roommate Terry put his arm around his neck and asked, "You haven't been seen every time after class recently. You went to study with Wade, right? I heard that Granger and Longbottom from Gryffindor went with you." A circle of little eagles looked at him with bright eyes. Michael raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "That's right, I didn't hide it from you. Why is there such a scene?" "So Longbottom can master the levitation spell, which is the result of your self-study." Lisa asked hurriedly, "I thought you were just doing homework together." "Michael, can you spare some time to teach me too?" Padma asked. "I'm not very proficient in the fire spell." Padma is a very beautiful Indian girl, and Michael has always been fascinated by her, but when it comes to learning spells, Michael will not steal the credit of others. "Although I am happy to teach you the spells I have mastered, Padma, it is Vader who is good at teaching, not me. We are all learning from Vader," Michael said honestly. "Vade." Everyone was silent for a moment. In their eyes, Vader Grey was particularly cold, handsome but serious, talented but isolated from the crowd. Obviously, he was the same age, but he didn't like to joke, play games, attend parties, or even talk about Quidditch. He always disappeared after class and didn't return to the tower until curfew. Usually, other students were used to chatting and doing homework in the lounge, but Vader rarely appeared in the common room. The little eagles felt that they were all unilaterally isolated by Vader. In short, he was a very distant person. This is also the reason why few people usually talk to Vader. The little wizards are a little afraid of him. The library was deserted, and Madame Pants didn't stare at the students, but took a book and slowly opened it. Seeing Wade coming in, she just glanced at him and lowered her head to read again. 2 months after the start of school, Madame Pants has become familiar with all the first-year students who often come to the library. She knows very well which students can be allowed to stay in the library without worry and which students need to be watched all the time, otherwise they will make noise, destroy books or even fight. Wade is the kind of student that she can be completely assured of. Wade came to the area of alchemy books with familiarity. He recently began to take time out to study alchemy. Alchemy studies the composition, structure and magical properties of the 4 basic elements, as well as material changes. It is closely related to potions, spells, ancient magic runes and defense against the dark arts. At Hogwarts, only those who have achieved good or above grades in these subjects in the ordinary wizard level examination can choose to practice alchemy. It is a very difficult subject. If low-grade students do not have the corresponding knowledge reserves, it is difficult to master this subject through self-study. In fact, their lives are full of the shadow of alchemy, the candles in the hall that never go out, the 142 moving stairs in the castle, the portraits on the walls that seem to be alive, the door knockers that ask different questions, as well as the flying broom, the golden snitch, the sorting hat, the wizard chess, the memory ball, etc. Basic alchemy is not that difficult to get started, but alchemists always like to use all kinds of uncommon words, obscure expressions, and exaggerated words mixed with fantasy, which invisibly raises the difficulty of learning. Wade's reading comprehension ability has been cultivated and trained for more than 20 years in his previous life, and he has enough knowledge reserves and vocabulary. Therefore, although it is difficult, he still reads the books on alchemy one by one. Some time ago, he read the books published by Nick Flamel many years ago, Alchemy Begins, and Analysis of Alchemy. Recently, Wade started reading The Book of Nature's Mysteries, The Fifth Element. This is written by the 12th century alchemist Raymond Luller. The so-called fifth element is the Philosopher's Stone. This book is actually a bit outdated, because Nick Flamel made the Philosopher's Stone, and he proved that many theories in this book are inconsistent with the facts. A voice came from the side suddenly, and Wade looked up in surprise, and saw the Weasley twins standing next to him, and the one who spoke was George Weasley. "Are you a freshman?" Fred simply pulled up his chair and sat across from him, saying, "It's too early to learn this now. But I have to say, you are very discerning. Alchemy is the most fascinating subject in magic. Close your ears and listen," George said, waving his wand to prevent Mrs. Pants from rushing over. "But Hogwarts isn't available until 6th year. It's a really stupid decision. Why can't we offer alchemy courses in 1st grade? Then most students don't dare to go home during the summer vacation," Fred said, pretending to be serious, "because they are destined to get extremely poor in their final exams. Except us. We're naturally good at this. So I started studying by myself a year ago," George said. "As a senior, I give you a suggestion, little Ravenclaw, you should start with Alchemy Preliminaries. Nick Flamel is still alive now, the greatest alchemist. His books are worth studying." Wade spread his hands. "But I've already finished reading that book." "Wow." Fred raised his eyebrows. "What about analytical alchemy?" "Seen it already." "What about On the Diversity of Species?" George asked. "The works of Thomas Aquinas in the 12th century." Wade hesitated and said, "I have seen it, but I have not read it carefully, because his book does not seem to involve the application of magic." George said, "Actually, it was because of the constraints of the environment at the time that he had to entrust the books to Muggles for publication. The content related to magic was very obscure. Of course, we recommend the 18th century book by Esner Vargas. In the revised version, he added more than 200 magical creatures and thousands of magical materials, making it more comprehensive and accurate. The Weasleys have read at least 20 or 30 books on alchemy, and have studied them in depth, and they can talk about them all like they are familiar with them." Vader felt like he had found a treasure, so he simply took out the parchment and wrote it down. If he didn't have classes to attend in the afternoon, he wouldn't even want to let them go. The few people were chatting so happily that they didn't even notice when they parted. They didn't ask each other's names. Today we are going to learn simple biological deformation, which is more difficult than ordinary object deformation. I need you to pay special attention. Professor McGonagall was lecturing in front, and the chalk automatically wrote the key points on the blackboard. Okay, does anyone know the dangers of biological transformation? The classroom was quiet, and there was no hand raised impatiently like usual. After a while, someone raised his hand hesitantly. Miss Mandy Block. Professor McGonagall looked at her encouragingly and said. Ravenclaw's Mandy Brogue stood up. There are 4 points in total. First, incomplete transformation will cause great irritation to creatures and then attack wizards. Second, Wade raised his head and looked around the classroom. He didn't see the brown-haired figure, but the other Gryffindor students were there. He asked Michael next to him, have you seen Hermione? Michael also raised his head and looked around, guessing, are you feeling unwell and resting in the dormitory? Professor McGonagall didn't say anything. This made sense, but Vader felt uneasy for no reason. At this time, Professor McGonagall glanced sternly at this side, and the two of them immediately shut their mouths, not daring to speak any more. When get out of class was over, the students swarmed out. Vader walked through the crowded corridors and found Harry and Ron. Excuse me, Potter, Weasley. Looking at Vader walking straight towards the two of them, Ron took a step back inexplicably. What's the matter, Gray? Have you seen Hermione? Wade asked. Why didn't she come to Transfiguration class? Harry subconsciously looked at Ron, who had a trace of uneasiness on his face and said guiltily, how do I know? We are not familiar with Granger. Wade narrowed his eyes slightly and looked directly into Ron's eyes. Ron lowered his eyes to avoid his gaze, grabbed Harry next to him, and said in a bluffing tone, if you have nothing else to do, we are going to have a rest. He pulled Harry away, but suddenly a voice came from behind him. Harry Potter. Harry looked back and saw Vader staring at him seriously. Do you really not know what happened? Against his gaze, Harry felt as if he had been dragged out into the sun, and his mouth felt dry. He wanted to defend his friend, but he couldn't lie. Hermione, Hermione, she cried, after Charms class. Harry finally whispered. We didn't see her again after that, I'm sorry. He was finally dragged away by Ron. Wade stood there, motionless, frowning and thinking. However, time has put a lock on his memory. He tried hard to recall, but he couldn't remember anything. Did they have a quarrel? Michael said clearly. Hermione's character is a bit too serious, so it's not surprising that she would quarrel with those Gryffindors. Let's go, she won't miss the Halloween dinner together. We'll ask what's going on later. Vader nodded. Not far behind the two of them, Padma tapped her fingers thoughtfully, then quickly caught up with her twin sister, talking to her in a low voice. In the evening, the auditorium hall has been decorated, with a huge jack-o'-lantern suspended below the ceiling and colorful skulls decorating the walls. Countless bats circled and danced in the auditorium, sometimes gathering together and whizzing past like dark clouds, and the flames in the jack-o'-lanterns also flickered. The dinner has not yet started, but students from the 4 colleges have almost filled all the seats, and professors are also arriving one after another. Dumbledore also deliberately changed into a Halloween-themed costume. He wore a pumpkin-colored robe with a small bat pattern on his hat, and talked to Professor McGonagall next to him with a smile. Vader glanced at the long Gryffindor table, but the lions were too noisy. The Weasley twins were running around with several boys, and there were exclamations and laughter from time to time. Wade stared for a long time, but couldn't find where Hermione was. At this time, someone suddenly tapped his shoulder. Before Wade could turn his head, he smelled a faint aroma. Padma pushed Anthony aside, who was sitting next to him, leaned closer and said, I know where Granger is. Wade asked. She didn't attend the dinner. No. Padma brushed the hair on her temples and whispered. Parvati said, oh, you should know, Parvati is my sister, she is in Gryffindor house, she said after Charms, that Weasley guy said something bad about Granger, said she was a nightmare and all that. Ron Weasley. Michael stretched his head over and asked in surprise. He is so talented, I mean, didn't Hermione give him a curse immediately? She cried. She cried in the toilet for a long time. Padma emphasized. She was very sad and refused to let others comfort her. Parvati asked for leave for her in the afternoon Transfiguration class. I just went to the toilet. After turning around, Granger is still inside. I'll go take a look. Wade stood up immediately. Padma said enthusiastically, I'll take you there. But the dinner is about to start. I didn't eat much at lunch just for this meal. Michael muttered. Seeing Wade striding quickly out of the auditorium, he finally stood up with a sigh and trotted to follow. Go up. As students arrived at the hall one after another, a few people who went against the flow stood out. At the Gryffindor table, Harry accidentally saw Wade walking out of the hall. He was originally immersed in the joyful atmosphere of Halloween and had completely forgotten what happened before, but at this moment, it was as if a basin of cold water was poured over his head, and his memory was instantly revived. Ron. He grabbed his friend's arm and asked, is Hermione not back yet? Ron, who was looking forward to a feast, didn't care much. It seems so. What's wrong? I just saw Gray and the others go out. Are they going to find Hermione? Harry said. Maybe. Granger has a good relationship with them. Well, they're going to find them anyway, so don't worry. Ron said indifferently. He was really fed up with Hermione's preaching, although he felt a little guilty when he saw the girl's tears. After so long, that guilt had long disappeared, and instead, the disgust brought by Hermione's condescending instructions was even deeper. But, Harry hesitated. They are all Ravenclaws, but Hermione is Gryffindor like us. A bat controlled by Fred's wand landed on Ron's head, and there was a burst of laughter around. Ron was busy driving the bat away and didn't pay attention to what Harry said. Harry hesitated for a moment, and finally left his seat before the dinner started and ran out of the hall. Dumbledore and Snape turned their eyes almost at the same time and watched him leave. In the girls' bathroom, Hermione was immersed in sadness when she heard two gentle knocks on the stall door. Hermione, is that you? Who are you? Hermione choked. Are you here to laugh at me too? I'm Padma Patil. Padma said softly. The Halloween dinner should have started, Hermione. Vader and Michael are waiting outside. They are worried about you. You go to the dinner party, don't worry about me. Let me stay by myself for a while. Hermione said stubbornly, wiping away more and more tears. Originally, she had been crying for so long and her tears had long since been shed. She was still hiding here just because she felt sad and didn't want to go out and face other people's eyes. But when I heard my friend's concern and was comforted by someone's gentle words, tears welled up again. Padma put her hand on the door panel of the cubicle and said softly, Hermione, I know what things Weasley said. But I don't understand why you should be sad because of the unfair evaluation of a stupid boy, but ignore it. A friend who really cares about you. Everyone says you are the smartest witch in the whole grade. Can't you tell what is really important? Hermione's sobs stopped and she didn't speak for a long time. Tell me a secret. People who slander you behind your back are often motivated by low self-esteem and jealousy. If you are smarter than others, better than others, and better than others in every aspect, they will want to hurt you by saying bad things. If you are heartbroken over this and push all your friends away, then the bad guy will succeed. Padma said, the best way is to ignore those who slander you, shine your light, and don't focus on the corners. If you don't feel happy enough, punch him in front of him. After all, you are the Lion of Gryffindor, right? Squeak. After a while, the compartment door was pushed open. Hermione walked out with red eyes and a cry in her voice. I am not the smartest witch, Padma, you are really smart. Padma smiled and gave her a hug. Wade and Michael had been waiting in the corridor for a long time and finally saw two girls coming out of the bathroom. In fact, they also heard Padma's advice to Hermione, but no one mentioned it. Michael opened his arms and joked with a smile, would you like me to give you a warm hug, Hermione? The brown-haired girl wiped her eyes, hugged Michael with a force that would break his ribs, let go when he was dazed, turned around and hugged Wade hard again. Thank you, sorry, Hermione whispered. Wade rubbed her head without saying anything. No need to apologize, but I can't wait to go enjoy the Halloween dinner now. I hope they haven't finished the dessert yet, Michael said, rubbing his belly, otherwise we will have to go to the kitchen to steal some food. Padma asked curiously, where is the kitchen in Hogwarts? Why have I never seen it before? Michael suddenly became energetic. The kitchen is very hidden. If it weren't for Theo and the others. Vader paused, stretched out his hand to block the others, and quickly drew out his wand with his other hand. What's wrong? Michael paused and asked in a low voice. Wade asked, didn't you hear the sound? Michael didn't answer, because all of them had already seen it. A huge, gray-green hand grabbed the wall around the corner, and a whirring sound came from an invisible place. Everyone's faces instantly turned pale, and Padma groaned, "Merlin, what a monster!" A huge creature came out from around the corner. It was 12 feet tall, its head almost touched the ceiling, it looked like it weighed at least 2 tons, and its skin was as disgusting as a toad. A huge body, a fat belly, and a short neck with a bald head with few hairs. The guy still exuded a disgusting stench, his long arms almost dropped to his knees, and he was holding a tree trunk-like stick in his hand. Impossible, in the castle, how can there be a troll in the castle? Padma's face turned pale, her legs were weak, and it was Hermione who supported her body. The giant monster lowered its head and saw a few people. There was cruel excitement in its small eyes. It raised its heavy legs and strode toward the people while raising the wooden stick in its hand. With trembling hands, Hermione pointed her wand at the troll, but she didn't know what spell to use. Michael fired spells repeatedly. Petrify them all. Petrify them all. He has not mastered this spell yet, and the spell falling on the giant monster is like a rhinoceros hide being hit by raindrops, with no effect. Vader raised his wand, all the spells he had mastered flashing through his mind. He has many spells at his disposal, but the troll's magic resistance is so high and its body is so strong that even the spells of an adult wizard can hardly work on it. This is a kind of monster that has no brains and no magic power, and the danger level is still as high as 4x level creatures are on the same level as thunderbirds and sphinxes. Although when Vader watched monsters and where to find them, for the first time, he felt that there was definitely something wrong with this classification. But at this moment, facing this kind of monster that is taller than a house, I still feel a suffocating feeling of oppression. Boom! A bucket suddenly hit the giant monster's head. Harry emerged from nowhere and shouted at them, "What are you doing standing still? Run!" Michael woke up from his dream, turned around, grabbed the 2 girls and ran away. Wade took a step forward and pointed his wand. Flocks of birds. A swarm of chirping birds flew out from the tip of the wand and flew into the troll's face. The simple-minded troll was immediately attracted to his attention. He purred from his throat and clumsily drove away the birds with his palms as big as palms. Seeing that it was useful, Michael and others also shouted, "Flocks of birds." But their spells had no effect, and the tip of the wand just fired a spark, briefly attracting the troll's attention. A dozen birds released by Wade surrounded the giant monster. The behemoth roared and made a terrifying roar. It smashed the surrounding decorations to pieces with wooden sticks, but there was nothing the flexible birds could do. But as time goes on, the number of birds is declining rapidly. Michael shouted, "This spell will hold him back for 10 seconds at most." Vader waved his wand vigorously. The chute is flat. The floor under the troll's feet suddenly became very slippery. It fell unexpectedly, and its huge body hit the ground heavily. The entire floor seemed to shake, and the wooden stick in its hand flew out. Hermione, who looked like she might faint at any moment, mustered up her courage, stretched out her wand and shouted, "Wingardium Leviosa." The wooden stick flew up high and fell again, hitting the giant monster on the head with a clang. The giant monster shook its head, struggled and roared to get up. Hermione gritted her teeth and manipulated the wooden stick to hit her a second time, a third time, and a fourth time. The troll finally passed out happily. Hermione stopped breathlessly and turned around to see several people looking at her in shock and awe. "What's wrong?" The girl's face turned slightly red. She pretended to be nonchalant, looked at Padma and said, "Well, you're right, giving it a punch is really satisfying." Padma was stunned and speechless. Is this what I taught you?" She was a little afraid to look into Wade and Michael's eyes. "Harry, troll. A troll has gotten into the castle, go back to the dormitory." "Giant." Ron rushed over yelling, and then his voice suddenly stopped. He took a breath when looking at the scene in front of him, and asked blankly, "What happened?" Ron held his face and screamed, "You killed a troll." Harry looked at everyone and saw that no one seemed to care about Ron, so he said, "No, Hermione knocked the troll unconscious." After a pause, he unconsciously added, "Use the levitation charm." The reason for the conflict between the two in the charms classroom before was that Hermione tried to teach Ron how to use the levitation charm correctly, but because of the instruction in her attitude, Ron became more dissatisfied. "Hermione, Ron was really surprised and muttered, "How is this possible? That's a troll." Hermione snorted hard, holding her wand. She was excited and terrified, staring at the motionless guy on the ground, as if something in her blood had awakened. Padma poked her head out from behind Wade and whispered, "Is the troll dead?" "No." Wade looked at the troll's slightly heaving chest and said, "It was just knocked unconscious." "Oh, that's good." Padma patted her chest. Suddenly there was a flurry of footsteps. Professor McGonagall rushed over first, her face pale, followed closely by Professor Snape, his black robes floating behind him, then Professor Flitwick, his small stature running fast, but still unable to catch up with the two in front, finally Professor Quirrell, who saw the troll's calloused feet head on, and immediately clutched his chest and sobbed, as if he was about to faint. Snape quickly glanced at Harry, who was standing blankly by the side, and bent down to check on the troll. Professor Flitwick said sharply in his unique, thin voice, "Oh, Merlin. Children, are you all right?" "We are fine, Professor," Michael said excitedly, "except that we were almost vomited by the stench of the troll." Professor Flitwick patted his arm happily and praised loudly, "Good job. First grade, defeated a troll. I dare say not many people can do this. How did you defeat this big guy?" "Ha ha ha, this is everyone's credit." Michael tried to retract his grinning mouth and said as modestly and seriously as possible, "Potter rushed out to attract its attention." Professor Snape immediately glared at Harry with a threatening look. Harry quickly lowered his head, wishing that Michael had never mentioned him, but Ron next to him looked at him enviously. "We all used the flock of birds to interfere with it, and then Wade used a spell." Michael forgot what it was and turned to look at Wade. "The slide is flat," Wade said. "Yes, the slide was flat, so the troll fell down." Michael continued, "Finally, Hermione knocked it out with a levitation spell." Professor Flitwick applauded and praised, "Excellent cooperation. It's amazing. A simple spell has achieved remarkable results. I want to give each of you 5 points. Phileas," Professor McGonagall shouted loudly. The unprecedented stern tone made Professor Flitwick, who was originally dancing with joy, shrink a little, shut his mouth silently, and stand aside. The green-robed witch swept everyone with cold eyes, and every student who looked at her lowered his head involuntarily, including Wade. "Trolls are very dangerous creatures. There are countless adult wizards killed by trolls. You should run away immediately when you encounter it and find the professor to deal with it. This time you are lucky that you were not killed by it, Miss Granger." Hermione shuddered. Professor McGonagall looked at the girl's brown head and asked, "I remember you asked for leave this afternoon because you were not feeling well. Why are you here?" Hermione probably never lied to the teacher. Being questioned in person, her mind was in a mess and she stammered, I read about trolls in books, I thought." Wade pressed the girl's shoulders and pushed her aside. This silly girl didn't want to say that she thought she could fight the troll, so she secretly ran to fight alone. This excuse was so stupid that even the troll would not believe it. It's okay if they don't believe it, but what if someone blames them for the troll breaking into the castle? Don't think this won't happen. Wade remembered that Harry was misunderstood by his classmates in the original book more than once or twice. She felt better in the evening and didn't want to miss the dinner, so we were originally going to the hall together. Wade said calmly. When we passed by here, Hermione and Padma went to the bathroom. Michael and I waited for a while, and when we left, we met the troll. We should have run away immediately, but it happened suddenly and everyone was scared and didn't react. Fortunately, Harry Potter diverted the attention of the troll and reminded us. Several professors looked at Harry again, and the boy's face flushed. He always felt that he didn't deserve such high praise. Michael looked at Wade thoughtfully, and understood something in his heart, and added, "Yes, he smashed a bucket on the troll's head and shouted for us to run fast, really brave." Professor Snape. Bucket. Harry stared at the ground, feeling that he was about to be tortured by Professor Snape's eyes. He now suspected that the two Ravenclaws were praising him so hard just to divert the professor's attention. "What about you, Mr. Weasley?" Professor McGonagall turned to Ron. "Why didn't you go back to your dormitory?" Ron was just thinking that he should have come with Harry, so that he could become a hero who saved everyone, and most importantly, let the arrogant Granger look at him in a new light. Suddenly, he was called by Professor McGonagall, and he was speechless and forgot what he should say. Professor McGonagall's eyes gradually became sharp. Harry could only stand up for his good brother and mustered up the courage to say, Ron is to remind us that there is a troll. Yes, we all heard it. Professor Snape suddenly sneered, and he said sarcastically, yelling in the corridor, as if he was afraid that the troll would not find him. I think it should be written in your books that the troll's hearing is more sensitive. Oh, I'm afraid Mr. Weasley's textbook has never been opened. It's like our savior Mr. Harry Potter used a bucket to attract the troll's attention. Bucket. I really hope you haven't forgotten that you are still a wizard. The Gryffindor duo's ears turned red with shame and anger. Michael secretly gave Wade a thumbs up in his heart. If he hadn't promoted Harry Potter, they might have been the ones being ridiculed now. He didn't know that Snape's obsession with Harry was permanent and unswerving. Even if there were 1,000 people here, he could only see Harry Potter. But with Professor Snape speaking, Professor McGonagall's anger seemed to have eased. She pondered and said, since it is excusable, I will not deduct any extra points from you. I will inform Professor Dumbledore about this. You all should hurry back to the lounge. The students are enjoying the Halloween dinner in their own colleges. Everyone hurriedly left, and when they were out of the professor's sight, someone suddenly laughed, and several people laughed one after another. To be honest, when I first saw that big guy, I thought we were going to die. Padma hugged Hermione's arm and said sincerely, Hermione, you are so brave. Hermione blushed and said, I had no other ideas at that time. All I could think about was the levitating spell. I mean, I'm really lucky. I've only made textbooks levitate before. Brother, your slide spell is so wonderful. Michael waved his wand and gestured, the slide is mediocre. You must teach me the next time you study in self-study. No problem. Vader turned around and said, Harry, don't pay attention to Professor Snape's comments. Using a bucket is a good idea. On the contrary, a normal spell cast on a troll is like being bitten by a mosquito. It's almost like a bite. No wonder Michael's petrification spell didn't work before. None of you used spells to attack the trolls directly afterwards. Harry thought and said, but I don't seem to have seen the one you used in standard spells, elementary. 2 spells. Vade has already learned standard spells, level 3 inches by himself in his spell class. Michael said proudly. And he spent all day in the library and study room, and he learned more spells than all of us. There are so many people combined, even though the school year has only been open for 2 months. Harry suddenly felt a little ashamed and inferior. If Ron, Michael or even Malfoy had mastered more spells than him, he could comfort himself by saying that it was because they had learned them at home. But he knew that neither Vader nor Hermione had ever been exposed to magic before entering school, but now they were the best students among the freshmen. He couldn't help but wonder, was he too slack in his studies? Seeing a few people talking and laughing, even Harry naturally joined in the conversation. Ron wanted to say something but couldn't get in, so it was very embarrassing to follow behind. Soon they reached a fork in the road and they separated. Harry, Hermione and Ron walked towards the Gryffindor Tower. Without Michael and the others to make jokes, the atmosphere among the 3 of them immediately became tense. Without looking at anyone, they quickened their pace and hurried back to the lounge. On the way back to Ravenclaw Tower, Padma pretended to be casual, looked at the road ahead, and said, Vade, can I also learn that spell with a mediocre slide? It seems very interesting. Of course, Wade said, there is no class tomorrow morning, so I can teach you. Well, it might not be convenient in the lounge, I heard. Padma glanced at Michael quickly and said, do you have a place dedicated to practicing spells? After all, she was only 11 years old. Although she had tried hard to make a roundabout request, the hint should not be too obvious. Vader understood. He thought for a moment and said, I need to seek other people's opinions, but I think they won't refuse your joining. Of course, welcome, Michael said with a smile. That's great. Padma couldn't help but jump a little, then blushed. She pretended to be steady, straightened her clothes, and said, I'm honored. Outside the lounge door, the eagle-shaped door knocker asked, O, T, T, F, F, S, S, E, N, what is the next letter? Ah, Michael is the kind of Ravenclaw who is not very good at guessing riddles. He held his chin and pretended to think, but gave up decisively after 3 seconds and asked, what do you think it is, Vader? It's A, T, Padma said. Correct answer, said the knocker in a chant, and opened the door. Why is it T? Michael was still asking when he entered the door. Is it the T of troll? This door knocker also knows that we defeated the troll today. He winked and exaggerated, and Padma couldn't help laughing. It says the first letters of 1 to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The common room was packed with people. It seemed like all the Ravenclaws were here, and there were several long tables next to the fireplace filled with food and drink. The students spent their second Halloween here, and it was even better than in the auditorium, because there were no professors here to keep an eye on things they weren't allowed to do. Wade saw that some usually withdrawn students also chose to stay in the lounge and just sit in the corner. I don't know when the lounge was changed into Halloween costumes. A huge skeleton walked around in the lounge, causing screams from time to time. There were also students wearing skull masks, and the masks occasionally made ghostly noises. Scream. Would you like a bloody lollipop? Terry enthusiastically recommended to Lisa. Wade bypassed the crowded crowd and went directly back to the dormitory. The stench of the troll seemed to still linger on the tip of his nose, and he was not in the mood to eat for the time being. Padma watched his back and asked Michael with some anxiety, didn't Vader not have dinner? Why didn't he come to the dinner? She was worried that it was because she was boring to others that Vader would rather I went back to the dormitory hungry and didn't want to get along with them. Don't worry, it has nothing to do with you. Wade just doesn't like places that are too busy, Michael said casually, focusing on piling food on his plate. Padma breathed a sigh of relief and felt a little hungry. After the two of them had filled their stomachs to 70% to 80%, they had time to continue chatting. By the way, remember to say something good for me in your study group when Wade asks for other people's opinions tomorrow. Padma remembered this and couldn't help but repeatedly reminded him. Okay, I promise to complete the task. Michael raised his hand and said with a smile. Ask for opinions. Michael knew better than anyone that as long as Wade agreed, others would have no objection at all. Theo and Ryan were both easygoing and could not refuse the candidates proposed by their partners. Neville was submissive, and Michael felt that he had no temper and no opinion. The only one who might be a little difficult to deal with was Hermione, and Padma had just established a good friendship with her. In fact, when Michael proposed that the addition of new members must be approved by everyone, what he actually meant was, if Wade doesn't agree, you can't bring others over. The restrictions were on the other 4 people. He knew very well that the SSC looked like a group that helped each other, but in fact, it was Vader who helped them most of the time. The notes organized by Vader made it easier for them to understand the obscure expressions in the books. The way of writing papers taught by Vader allowed them to complete high-quality homework in a short time, and Vader also helped them master various spells quickly and accurately. Anyone who joins this group can feel the benefits in a short time. Gryffindor and Hufflepuff are both enthusiastic guys. If they think this place is good, they may bring their other friends here without saying hello. Maybe they think that bringing more members is contributing to the group. In fact, it just adds trouble to Vader, and the SSC will not last long. Vader will not refuse on the surface, but when there are more and more people and more noise, he will disappear from the umbrella house quietly one day, just like now, staying in a quiet and lonely place with only him. That's why Michael had to set up rules, and then use the rules to restrain the people from the 2 academies from being too enthusiastic, and also use the rules to tactfully reject those who tried to join through him. The only exception was Wade, because he was the center. He could of course decide who he wanted to help. Michael didn't tell anyone about these calculations. At this time, facing Padma's request, he just nodded with a smile, and promised that he would try his best to persuade others. Wade returned to the dormitory and found an unexpected visitor here. A house elf wearing a tea towel stood in the middle of the room, staring at him with big gray-green eyes without blinking, which scared him suddenly. Wade almost cast a spell, and only breathed a sigh of relief after seeing who it was. Zoe. Why are you here? House elves usually take it as an honor not to appear in front of their masters, so except for going to the kitchen, Wade has never seen the school's house elves appear in his sight. Zoe twisted her slender fingers, obviously feeling very embarrassed. She said softly, Vedgray didn't have dinner, and Zoe is a little worried. Zoe knows she shouldn't show up, but she still came. Zoe wants to know if Vedgray is feeling unwell. I'm fine. Vid half squatted and said, it's just that the trolls are too smelly, and I have no appetite now. Zoe said seriously, but not eating is not good for the body. Vid Gray gave Zoe a gift, and Zoe likes it very much. She also cares about Vid Gray's health and doesn't want him to be hungry. House elves talk very interestingly, whether they are addressing themselves or others, even when they are face to face, they use the third person. Ved looked at Zoe, who still had a small pumpkin carriage hanging around her waist, and the light in the lantern flickered. Okay, he sighed, please help me get some fruit, okay. Don't make it into jam or pudding, just fresh fruit. I'll eat some fruit after taking a bath and then go to bed. Yes, sir. Zoe nodded happily and disappeared from the room with a pop. When Wade came out of the bathroom with a lot of water vapor on his body, he saw a basket of fruits on the table, apples, pears, bananas, a few strawberries, and a bunch of green grapes, washed clean with water droplets on them. Wade took an apple and took a bite. It was plump and juicy, and he was very moved. In his previous life, his mother insisted on keeping healthy and believed that people should eat 12 kinds of food every day to provide sufficient nutrition to the body. Vegetables and fruits are the top priority, and sometimes they can be different for a month. After rebirth, although the food in Hogwarts is much richer than when he was at home, most of it is barbecue and desserts. There are few kinds of vegetables, and the cooking methods are also very monotonous. Fresh fruits have never appeared on the long table. At this moment, Wade made up his mind. After graduation, he wanted to go to the East to see. Magic is the wings of miracles, but the future is in the East. And in this world, there are also mysterious powers, and maybe you can see more wonderful scenery. Padma's joining SSC was very smooth, and no one raised any objections. After all, this girl is not only smart and generous, but also very beautiful. Her deep eyebrows and eyes are like affectionate ones, which makes Theo and others blush unconsciously. Hermione spent more and more time on studying, because Wade made her feel a lot of pressure. In the most recent Transfiguration class, Wade successfully turned a mouse into a beautiful little teapot, with delicate lines like a handicraft just put on the shelf. Professor McGonagall praised Wade's transfiguration loudly and said that his current level can get an O in the final exam. At the same time, Hermione also knew that Wade's owl brought him a full set of standard spells and intermediate transfiguration from Diagon Alley. Therefore, although Hermione is already the best first-year student in Gryffindor College, she still feels that she is behind in progress. She is irritable in studying every day and has confronted Ron several times. Since she knocked the troll unconscious, Ron has never complained about this or that, let alone said something behind his back. Now Ron is looking forward to Hermione's guidance, because he found that Hermione is right. But Hermione finally corrected her habit of being a teacher. She tried to turn a blind eye to the various violations of school rules by Gryffindors, which improved her popularity in the college. Especially Harry, they were almost friends. Wade could hear Hermione complain almost every day. I had a whole weekend to do my homework, but I only wrote a title. I didn't know how to get anxious until I had to hand it in, saying something like, Hermione, please let me copy the homework. Did you let him copy it? Wade asked while writing. No. Hermione wrinkled her nose and said disdainfully, what's the benefit of copying homework? But I promised to help him check it after he finished it. But Hermione, Padma asked puzzledly, won't this cause more trouble for you? Hermione looked at her incredulously. This is the only way to learn knowledge. The two girls looked at each other, and after a moment, they tacitly skipped this topic. When Padma finished her homework, only Neville was still biting the pen and continuing to work hard. She stuffed the parchment into her school bag and walked briskly around the partition wall. To prevent people practicing spells from disturbing students doing homework, Wade recently added a sky blue partition wall to the umbrella room, dividing the room into two areas with a ratio of 1:3, and added a silencing spell in the middle. Turning to the other side, there were 2 rows of targets in the classroom. Most of them were very worn out, and the damage could not be restored by the repair spell, but it did not affect their continued use. The entire wall at the end was installed with a mirror. Wade said that this would make it convenient for them to correct their movements at any time. Michael repeatedly set the target on fire with burning flames and then extinguished it with clear water like a spring. Theo tortured his target with shattered and repaired in turn. Hermione cast a dancing spell on a spider, and the spider's slender legs danced wildly in the air. Ryan chanted to a gray mouse in front of him that was looking around, "Petrify all." The mouse's body suddenly stiffened, with only its tail swaying slightly. After a moment, it rushed out and turned into a small branch in the air with a bang. Petrify spell. This spell is centered on the wrist when drawing a circle, and the turning should be quick and fast. Wade waved his wand, and the branch floated in the air. He used the tip of the wand again, and the branch turned into a mouse again. Petrify all. Wade demonstrated it once, and suddenly the mouse's claws and tail were pressed against its body, as hard as a board, and fear seemed to be revealed in its dark eyes. It fell to the ground with a thud, just like a stone. Wade untied the spell, let Ryan continue to practice, then walked to Padma and asked, "Do you want to learn the slide first, or practice other spells?" "That," Padma stuck out her tongue and said embarrassedly, "actually, I can't even use the repair spell sometimes." She waited for Wade to show an expression of, "This is a big trouble," but the other party just tapped the target next to him with his wand, and the wooden target immediately cracked in the middle. Wade said, "Then start with the repair spell, let me see your level first." When Padma raised her wand, her arms were shaking slightly. She suddenly realized that she might have made the best decision since she entered school. She must learn a lot here. Repair as before. The weather has been getting colder and colder recently, but the atmosphere in the school has quietly become hotter, because the Quidditch season has begun. Michael is a loyal Quidditch fan. He even attended the Quidditch World Cup last year. The game lasted for 5 days and 5 nights. Michael talked about 7 times how the Scottish team just missed the victory and how the Canadian team narrowly won the championship. It was also due to his eloquent explanations that even Wade was familiar with many famous teams, such as the Heidelberg Hounds of Germany, the Vratsa Eagles of Bulgaria, the Fitchburg Sparrows of the United States, and the Glory No More Chudley Artillery and more. There are also various Quidditch tricks, such as the eagle head attack formation, Prenton's back technique, etc. But don't look at Michael's knowledge of all kinds of difficult Quidditch tricks and wonderful performances on the field. As soon as he got on the broom, it was like stepping on a landmine. His whole body was tense and cautious, and his speed was only faster than that of a running pony. Be faster, and never rise above 10 meters. Vader had always suspected that even in the second year, when they could bring broomsticks into the school, Michael would have to climb the stairs back to the dormitory, because the height of the Ravenclaw Tower is several times 10 meters high. Because Michael can't help but talk about Quidditch, and the topics Vader neither understands nor is interested in, so he has begun to avoid Michael recently, maybe only during Ravenclaw versus Hutch. After Patch's game is over, Michael can become a little more normal. Hermione has also become busier recently, and there are a few more Quidditch-related books on her desk, because Harry is about to participate in the first game in his life and is too nervous to eat all day long. The relationship between the two of them had started to get better recently, and Hermione's way of caring for her friend was to try to find ways to help him in the books. Wade felt that Michael could talk to Hermione more. One of them liked to talk and the other was willing to listen. It was a perfect fit. It's a pity that the time of the two colleges is not exactly the same. Most of the time, it is Vader who is forced to receive the Quidditch match review broadcast. However, there was an addition of Padma recently, and when she and Michael were having a lively chat, Vader was finally able to clear his mind for a while. Hogwarts Castle is a huge complex, and it's easy to find a deserted corner here. Vader found an empty classroom on the 6th floor near the library. There was a small platform outside the classroom window. This was Vader's recently discovered secret location. The platform is surrounded by taller buildings. It is hidden and protected from the wind, and it cannot be seen from other windows. The view is still very good. You can see the Quidditch pitch and the Forbidden Forest in the distance. Several small figures were flying above the Quidditch pitch, looking like a few hard-working bees from a distance. Judging from the flash of golden red, it should be the Gryffindor team training. Speaking of which, Hermione told something in the umbrella room yesterday. Wood, the captain of the Gryffindor team, got angry in the lounge recently because he had previously asked the entire academy to keep Harry Potter's joining the team a secret. Wanted to use this as a secret weapon, but now it seems that everyone in the school already knows. Wood believed that someone had leaked the secret, and stared at the little lions with sharp eyes every day, trying to find the spy. As a result, several girls cried because they were dating people from other colleges. But in fact, this matter is obvious. The Gryffindor team trains 3 times a week and never takes a break no matter how bad the weather is. Whenever this happens, Harry Potter suddenly disappears, only to reappear exhausted when training is over. After a few repetitions, anyone will guess that he has joined the Gryffindor team. What's more, when they fly so high, there are always 1 or 2 students with good eyesight who can recognize them. Wade stared at the stadium in the distance for a while. The flying figures felt chaotic, and he didn't see any formations such as figure 8 surround or eagle head attack. He shook his head, not knowing that it was his own vision. If it doesn't work, it's because the players there are not good enough. In comparison, alchemy is much more interesting. The wand was waved, and several small blue fireballs appeared out of thin air, exuding bursts of warmth. Wade took out, on the diversity of species, he borrowed from the library from his school bag, turned the stone pillar on the platform into a cushion, and sat against the wall to read the book. After an unknown amount of time, he suddenly heard footsteps. Wade didn't pay attention at first, but after reading the 2 lines of words, something suddenly clicked in his heart. There was a faint smell of garlic in the air. Before his brain could react, Vader subconsciously cancelled the fire magic and transformation spell, stood up quietly and extremely quickly, and stood close to the wall behind the raised wall tiles. "What are you looking at?" A sharp voice was speaking, very softly, but with a gloomy and irritable feeling, as if it was speaking right next to his ear. Vader almost thought he had seen himself before and said this to himself. Fortunately, when he hesitated for a moment, another timid voice answered. "It's Harry Potter, Master," the voice said. "He's training on the Quidditch pitch with his teammates." Vader immediately understood that this was Quirrell and Voldemort, who was hanging on the back of his head. They were just across the wall from him. He held his breath and subconsciously shrank back, not daring to take a breath. "Harry Potter." Voldemort read the name resentfully and said in a whisper, "Yes, the boy who lived, the savior of the wizarding world. There is only a shadow left in me. When he was wandering around, he stepped on my corpse and became a big star, right? I guess Dumbledore must have high hopes for him." Quirrell's mood was probably similar to Wade's. He shrank and didn't dare to speak. "Kill him, Quirrell," Voldemort ordered coldly. "Kill him when he is the center of attention." But Master, I can't do anything with Dumbledore here. You said you would never attract Dumbledore's attention," Quirrell stammered, looking extremely frightened. "Are you questioning me, Quirrell? How dare you disobey my orders?" Voldemort didn't know what he had done, and Quirrell immediately groaned in pain. "No, I dare not. I obey orders. I obey orders, Master. I obey any of your orders. Please spare me," Quirrell roared, begged, and kept rolling on the ground. But Voldemort did not stop immediately. After the torture continued for a while, Voldemort let him go, out of mercy. "Use your brain, idiot," Voldemort finally said in a voice full of malice. "He is going to participate in the Quidditch game, flying at an altitude of 50 meters, even if he falls from the broom, no one will doubt him. A coward who can't speak clearly will just think that he is not good at skills. What's the surprise if a kid like him who doesn't even know a few spells is thrown to death?" Quote, Yes, I understand, I will do it," Quillo said tremblingly as he lay on the ground with tears streaming down his face. After a while, Wade heard the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor get up from the ground, tidily arrange his clothes, probably wipe his tears, and then leave with heavy steps. Only then did Wade let out a long breath, and his back was soaked with cold sweat in an instant. Thump thump thump. His heart was beating violently, his soaked clothes stuck to his body, and when the cold wind blew, the chill penetrated his bones. This is the closest Vader has come to death since his rebirth. Although in the plot, the first-grade Harry Potter can easily deal with the pendant version of Voldemort as if he is playing a game, but that is because the magic left by his mother is protecting him. If it were the current Vader, even if he mastered 10 times more spells than Harry Potter, he would probably die if Voldemort discovered him. Reincarnated as a human being, Vader is not too afraid of death. But he can accept that he died for a great purpose, or to protect the people he loves, but he cannot accept that he died for such a ridiculous reason, because he overheard the villain's secret and being silenced, he died as silently as cannon fodder. Worried that he would encounter Quirrell again after leaving here, Wade hid on this hidden platform for a long time and fell asleep leaning against the wall without realizing it. When he suddenly woke up, he realized that it was already close to early morning. The sky is still very dark. The Quidditch pitch has long been empty. In the huge campus, there is only one adult wizard with silver white hair walking by the Black Lake, probably a professor, but not Dumbledore, because Dumbledore still has a long hair, white beard. Wade didn't see the man's appearance clearly, but he didn't care, as long as it wasn't Quirrell. He stood up holding on to the wall. He felt lightheaded and his body shook involuntarily, almost losing his balance. Broken, Wade thought to himself, and stretched out his hand to touch his forehead. He didn't feel very hot, because the palm of his hand was also surprisingly hot. As he breathed, the hot air burned his nose, giving Wade the illusion that if he placed an egg next to him, he could boil the egg with his own heat. Wade climbed into the empty classroom through the window and dragged his exhausted body to the school doctor's office. Most of the portraits in the corridor were sleeping, but there was also a young red-haired wizard lying idle on the frame in a daze. After seeing Wade, his eyes lit up and he asked curiously, "What's wrong with you? Are you sick? Why don't you go back to the lounge tonight? Madame Pomfrey probably hasn't gotten up yet. Do you need me to wake her up for you?" "Ha ha, I lied to you. There is no portrait of me in her bedroom. Why don't you talk? Just pay attention to me. I'm bored when I'm awake alone." Vader had no energy to pay attention to him at all, but the red-haired wizard chased him through several frames with determination. He kept chattering and did not feel embarrassed when he received no response. This shows that the original body must be hopeless. Talkative. It wasn't until there was no portrait in the long corridor ahead that the red-haired wizard reluctantly gave up. He also shouted loudly from a distance, "You must have no friends with your personality, right? Come to me when you feel better. I can chat with you." Vader had a burning headache and almost wanted to pry his head open. The wizard's nagging made him even more annoyed and distracted most of his attention. When Vader noticed that there were other people besides himself in the corridor, when there was another footsteps, the sound was already very close to him. Almost just a corner away. Wade suddenly became stiff. He subconsciously wanted to avoid it, but his slow body didn't have time to react. Thumping. Footsteps are approaching. Thumping. The world seemed to shrink in front of my eyes, my vision became blurred, but my hearing remained sharp. Thumping. A figure appeared from behind the corner. "What's wrong with you, kid?" someone asked him. But Wade's brain was like a rusty gear, and he didn't answer for a while. "Oh, you have a serious fever." The man pushed him gently. "Come with me, kid, follow me over here, luckily my office is nearby." The silver white hair swayed in front of his eyes, looking a bit like Dumbledore, and Vader lowered his guard. A few minutes later, Vader was holding the empty cup, steam was constantly coming out of his ears, and he looked at the wizard in front of him with dull eyes, which made him look stupid. What suddenly appeared in the corridor was not the Quirrell he was worried about, nor the Dumbledore he thought he was, but a strange wizard. He looked to be at least 80 years old, wearing dark blue robes, with short silver white hair neatly combed and no beard. It is worth noting that he wears a muggle shirt and suit trousers under his robes, his tie is perfectly tied. It is generally difficult for wizards to do this, and there is a strange gold-rimmed glasses hanging in the breast pocket. At that time, the wizard appeared in the corridor and noticed that Vader was not in good condition, so he took him to the office and took out his own pick-me-up. I have to say that it is much more effective than the potion in the school doctor's office. After drinking it, Wade's groggy head immediately became much clearer. Except for his ears that were still steaming, everything else was fine and he could see his environment clearly. This is a circular room, with more than a dozen large and small magic lamps illuminating the room as bright as day. There are many weird and interesting little things on the shelves and tables. There is a golden hourglass rotating slowly, a dozen small crystal balls are strung on silver wires, and the colorful lights inside light up as if they can breathe. There is a very realistic manner on the cabinet next to it. There is a thumb-sized little man and an even smaller dog living in it. They can even fetch water and cook. There are also some Muggle technological creations in the room, a refrigerator, an oven, a TV, a computer, a washing machine, and even a disassembled car engine. This was truly the strangest room Vader had ever seen. The wizard who brought him was playing with a radio. After a while, a woman's passionate voice came from it. Dear listeners, busy wizards, good morning. A wonderful day starts with the Magic Hour. Today your favorite Glenda Chittick is still hosting the show. First of all, let us enjoy Celestina new song released by Warbeck, You Stole My Pot, But You Can't Get My Heart. Oh, luckily I didn't miss it. This is my favorite radio program. The wizard muttered, turned around and asked with a kind smile, do you feel better, kid? Yes, I'm much better. Thank you for your help, sir. Wade asked cautiously. Excuse me, are you? I am Professor of Alchemy, Terence Murray. Professor Murray smiled and said, if you can achieve, excellent, in charms, transfiguration and ancient runes in the 5th grade OWL's exam, Black, you also need to get good grades in magic defense, herbology and potions, and you can take my class in the 6th grade. You like alchemy, don't you, kid? He glanced down and saw that a small portion of, On the Diversity of Species, was sticking out of his bag. He pushed the book back and said, yes, Professor, I am teaching myself alchemy. This content may be a little too early for you. You should start with the basic content, such as the magic phonetic chart. I have memorized all of the magic phonetic chart, sir. There are also magic symbol collection, rune dictionary, and a simple introduction to ancient magic texts. In addition, I have also read Mr. Nick Flamel's Preliminaries of Alchemy and Analytical Alchemy. Professor Murray was stunned. Hogwarts has alchemy courses for 6th years and above, but the author did not find the name of the alchemy professor. The elective requirements for Terence Murray's personality and alchemy courses are set privately by the author. Alchemy is closely related to ancient runes, and ancient runes are a very difficult course to learn. In addition to the history of magic, most courses in magic schools focus on practice, but ancient runes must be memorized by rote. Characters, shapes, pronunciations, and meanings, ancient runes are very different from modern languages in all aspects. If you want to master the basics of this course, there is no other way except to recite. And many students who choose to take the ancient rune course, it is rare to memorize all these things until graduation. Fortunately, there is no Ravenclaw student with a bad memory. Even if it is not as good as Hermione, Wade has done special training to strengthen his memory, and his recitation speed is not much slower than Hermione. After 3 months of contact with magic, he relied on his strong memory and his love for magic alchemy to memorize all the books, and strengthened his memory by reciting again and again. Now he will not make mistakes in this regard. After a moment of silence, Professor Murray began to ask questions about the contents of those books, and then took out parchment and a quill pen, randomly asked some ancient magic characters and short sentences, and asked Wade to write them down. More than an hour later, Professor Murray had to admit that the student in front of him, who seemed to him to be a child, did not lie, and he really understood everything he said. Alchemy is one of the most difficult courses in Hogwarts, and Professor Murray's requirements are also very strict. There are less than 10 students who can choose to practice alchemy in each class, and they are all the best in the grade. But Professor Murray dared to say that if he called the 7th grade students he was teaching now, even the best one would make 1 or 2 small mistakes in these questions. Alchemy requires a genius-like sharp imagination and creativity, as well as a more meticulous, rigorous, and meticulous attitude than the gears of a watch. And these 2 qualities often do not exist in one person at the same time. What's more, this is just one. Professor Murray suddenly realized that he knew nothing about the student in front of him. Child, what grade are you in now? The old professor said with a pleasant face. 1st grade, sir, Wade said. Professor Murray was silent again. I remember, Ancient Runes is an elective course for 3rd graders. Yes, sir, Wade said, trying to look calm, not like a peacock showing off with its tail spread out. Professor Murray didn't care whether the student in front of him was mature enough. He just began to recall his 11 years old, and the level when he started to learn alchemy at the age of 16, and the great wizards he knew, such as Dumbledore, such as Grindelwald, such as Voldemort, the level they showed in the 1st grade. Thinking about it, Professor Murray looked at Wade more and more as if he saw an undiscovered treasure. His smile became more and more kind, and he asked softly, What's your name? Which college are you from? Wade Gray, Ravenclaw College. Wade looked up and said, he had noticed something from the change in the other party's attitude. Professor Murray asked again, you like alchemy very much, right, Wade? At this time, his tone was completely different from before. Yes, Professor. Wade's answer was the same as always. This is a very wonderful field, with enough power to change the world. Perhaps I will spend my whole life studying it. As a wizard, what do you think of the technological inventions of Muggles? Professor Murray asked again. This question couldn't be easier. The furnishings in the office were enough to show what kind of answer the professor wanted to hear. But Wade was silent this time. He thought seriously for a long time before saying, Muggle technology is developing rapidly, production tools are constantly innovating, information exchange and communication are becoming more efficient, and the changes to the world are becoming more and more significant. Wizards need to take the initiative to learn, absorb, and integrate, otherwise they will be left behind by the times one day. This is his heartfelt thought. Although he yearns for the wonders of magic, let's compare the real gap between the two sides. Wizard communication. OWL. Muggle communication. Mobile phones and networks that can be reached instantly. The number of wizards, there are only about 3,000 in the UK, and only a few 100,000 to 1 million in the world. The number of Muggles, there are more than 57 million in the UK alone, and 5.4 billion in the world, and this number will increase to 7 billion in 20 years, and 8 billion in 30 years. Wizards kill. Only a few dark wizards can use the killing curse. Muggles kill. Maxim machine guns, incendiary bombs, nuclear bombs, self-propelled artillery, howitzers, intercontinental missiles, and 2-year-old children can also shoot and kill people. The gap between the two sides is so big that in the past era of Muggle ignorance, wizards could only survive by hiding themselves as much as possible. In the future, when technology is becoming more and more powerful, wizards must learn from, get close to, and integrate with the Muggle world, so that they will not be easily swallowed up by the times. In fact, Wade has many more dangerous ideas, but it is not convenient to say them out. He is afraid that if he talks too much, Professor Murray's good impression of him will disappear, and he will be swept into the ranks of the third generation of the Dark Lord. How unfair is that? Professor Murray was very satisfied with just such a general answer. He smiled and said, I teach 6th and 7th grade students every Monday and every Thursday. If you have any questions, you can ask here. Come see me in the office at any time. As long as you maintain your passion for alchemy, I will be happy to give you 2 hours a week to teach you. Professor Murray spoke very reservedly, but the next moment he found a book, Learning to Make Magic Items from Scratch, from his collection and lent it to Vader, and set a tutoring time for Thursday. Only then did Wade leave. When going out with the book in his arms, Wade saw the Black Lake next to the Forbidden Forest through the window, and suddenly remembered the figure he saw when he woke up in the morning. Apparently, that should be Professor Murray, right? The same silver-white hair. Suddenly, Wade's steps stopped, his scalp suddenly became numb, and goosebumps suddenly appeared. When did he see that person? After arriving, I met Professor Murray. Was there 10 minutes in between? Hateful. The fever was so severe that I lost track of time. Anyway, it shouldn't be too long. If that person was Professor Murray, how could he arrive at Vader's location in just 10 minutes or so? Apparition is prohibited in Hogwarts. Professor Murray's arms and legs are old and he certainly can't climb stairs very quickly, and he doesn't look like a young boy who can ride a broom. If that person wasn't Professor Murray, or Dumbledore, then who could he be? Is it another professor that Wade doesn't know, or? He thought that maybe he was overthinking it. Harry Potter's first year at school should be a very peaceful year, at least for ordinary students, but the chills still came up one after another. What's the matter, Vader? Professor Murray asked behind him. This voice that sounded kind and gentle before now had an inexplicable and eerie atmosphere. It's nothing. Wade was surprised that his voice was so calm at this time, with a hint of gratitude. I just thought that Professor, fortunately, you passed by and found me this morning. Did you just come back from outside at that time? Of course not. Professor Murray didn't seem to be suspicious. He smiled and explained casually, I usually don't live on campus. I only come to campus through the fireplace when I need to go to class. Oh, the fireplace in my office can be used temporarily. Access to the flow network, which is authorized by the Ministry of Magic. I just arrived at the office this morning when I heard Griffiths shouting in the corridor, and I met you when I went out." The red-haired wizard tapped the frame boredly, and from time to time he poked his head to see what the other portraits were doing. This tower is called the Astronomy Tower by students because they observe stars and take astronomy classes at the top of the tower every week. Even most of the portraits in the corridor are related to astronomy. Most of them were quiet and silent, and no one wanted to chat with him. Suddenly he heard footsteps, and then saw a familiar student walking by, and hurriedly chased after him. "Hey, have you recovered from your cold? Murray gave you some medicine, right? That old guy's refreshing medicine is really good." He thought the student would walk away without looking back like before, but he didn't expect that the other student suddenly stopped and looked at him thoughtfully. "Your name is Griffiths?" Wade asked. "That's right." The red-haired wizard nodded happily. "Did Murray tell you that? Now he is the only one who occasionally chats with me. Aren't there many portraits here?" Wade gestured around. "Oh, don't mention it," Griffiths said depressedly. "Did you see the old man in the portrait diagonally opposite?" Wade looked over and saw that he was talking about an old wizard with stars painted on his robe and hat. He was standing in front of a large telescope and looking at the starry sky intently. Griffiths said, "He has been holding the telescope unchanged for hundreds of years, observing the starry sky that has not changed for hundreds of years in the portrait, and he will only find me annoying." And Shalom, the one wearing glasses, always she was writing calculations on parchment without stopping. In fact, the results of her calculations had been confirmed by Muggle scientists more than 100 years ago, and she was still calculating. Quote, Vader saw a thin witch sitting at her desk calculating, and even after hearing Griffith's words, she did not stop. "And those children over there who are stargazing, have you seen it? They are just a bunch of Cornish goblins," Griffiths complained. "When they are not stargazing or sleeping, they must be making trouble everywhere, knocking over Old Man Star's telescope, tearing Shalom's parchment, or pulling my hair, spilling ink on my robes. I've had enough." Griffith sighed lonely and helplessly. Even though Wade was in a bad mood, he was still amused by him, and the gloom, heaviness and doubt in his heart seemed to be dispelled. He asked, "How long have you been hanging here? Are you still not used to it?" "Oh, you don't know, I actually hung it in the foyer on the first floor, surrounded by portraits. I can still watch the little wizards coming and going every day, and occasionally teach them pranks. I don't know how interesting it is," Griffiths regretted said. "But later, in order to hang Fosco's portrait, they moved me to the Astronomy Tower. I originally thought it would be good to meet some new friends. I didn't expect it to be so boring here." Quote, "Can't portraits be visited everywhere?" Wade asked. "It's possible, but it's very laborious. Most of the time I can only stay in my portrait," Griffiths said expectantly. "Can you move my portrait back to the foyer? Or change it to another just a lively place? I will repay you." Wade did not agree immediately, but said, "I have to ask the professor first. As long as they don't object, I will help you change places." Griffiths thought for a while and asked, "What if they object?" "Then I'll secretly help you find another place, but it can't be placed in the foyer, it will be too conspicuous," Wade said. "Great." Griffiths almost jumped up with excitement, urging, "Then go and ask. Go and ask early." "Okay." Wade smiled and turned to leave. He originally wanted to ask Griffiths if Professor Murray really came out of his office this morning and if Quirrell came to this place often. But after chatting for a few words, he gave up the idea. The red-haired wizard talked a lot and didn't seem to be able to keep secrets, and he and Professor Murray must have known each other for longer, so why should Vader ask him to keep secrets for himself? It's better to change the portrait to another place first, and then make any plans. Terence Murray finally finished teaching the 7th grade students, then angrily left with his lesson plan under his arm, leaving only a few students looking at each other like quails, as if they had just been through a storm. Baptism. What does "the first-year students are better than you" mean? Do first graders know what alchemy is? Do you know how to write 0 in runes? They were not convinced, but during Professor Murray's reprimand, no one dared to refute, and could only say with a low eyebrow, "Yes, yes, you were right." Professor Murray became even more angry. After meeting Vader, he looked at his carefully selected students and became more and more dissatisfied with them. He then looked at the alchemy work they completed last time and became even more dissatisfied. In the end, he kept 5 times the amount of money he usually had. Homework, I still feel that these students have it too easy. Professor Murray returned to his office angrily, and heard an enthusiastic voice from a distance. Did your class go well today, Professor Murray? The little wizards must have learned a lot, right? Faced with a passionate attitude, it is difficult for people to be truly indifferent. Professor Murray smiled unconsciously. Oh, Griffiths. Yeah, who else but me? Griffiths said. Professor Murray couldn't help but stand in the corridor and complain to him about his students. Not only is he not as smart as others, he is not as hardworking as others. Why learn alchemy? It's better to be a decoration in the Ministry of Magic. So you are interested in that little wizard? Griffiths asked with a smile, lying on the picture frame. Professor Murray was silent for a moment, and suddenly sighed. Griffiths, genius wizards often behave differently from others since childhood. They are talented and attract everyone's attention as soon as they enter school. However, talented people always yearn to learn those difficult and dangerous magics, master more powerful powers, and pursue greater interests, but not many people are willing to settle down and study alchemy. But in my opinion, even if you master the most dangerous forbidden magic in the world, what can you do? Look at those who were once famous. Some fell as quickly as a meteor, some became the notorious Dark Lord, and some had nothing even with such a great reputation. The more powerful they are, the more death and killing they bring to the world. Those who can truly bring changes to the wizarding world and bring happiness to people should its alchemy. Only by constantly learning from muggles, innovating technology, and improving alchemical products can we make the wizarding world develop better and prevent wizards from being wiped out by muggles. Quote. But these years, although I have made some achievements and introduced some products invented by muggles into the magical world, I just feel like a baby learning to walk. The harder I try to catch up with the giants in front of me, the more I find that the gap between the two sides is so huge that it makes people despair. This gap is still getting bigger every moment. And what about my students? They only think about inventing some popular magic items and making a lot of money. They only think about this. But that child is different, right? Griffiths suddenly asked. Yes, Professor Murray smiled, although he is only 11 years old. Quote. Wade didn't know that Professor Murray had placed great expectations on him just from a one-sided relationship. He was just happy that he was finally able to get professional guidance after studying alchemy as if he was groping in the dark. After returning to the auditorium, the 4 long tables were empty, with only a few students who had slept in the morning eating breakfast slowly. Today is Sunday, most students will not get up early, and the breakfast time has been extended by half an hour accordingly. Vader casually took 2 sandwiches and saw Westmore, Ravenclaw's 6th-year boy prefect, at the end of the long table, so he walked over and sat next to him. Good morning, West. Morning, Wade, West said lazily. It's rare to see you sleeping in. Wade leaned forward and got closer. West, do you know who the alchemy professor in the school is? Of course, it's Professor Terence Murray. West said, I took his advanced class this year. Why do you ask? Because I am very interested in alchemy, I want to learn about it in advance. Wade did not mention his chance encounter in the morning, but asked, who is Professor Murray? When the freshmen were admitted, I didn't seem to hear anyone mentioned. Of course, Professor Murray is not in school at all times. It is impossible to see him whether it is the freshman orientation or the Halloween dinner. West said matter-of-factly, he is a famous alchemist. It is said that the level of alchemy is second only to, of course, everyone agrees that Nick Flamel is the greatest alchemist of our time. There are at least 5 or 6 people who are called Nick Flamel's second, but Professor Murray is not that. A person who pursues fame and reputation really has something. West suddenly came closer, lowered his voice and said yearningly, did you know? Professor Murray even has shares in the Nimbus Broomstick Company and Wizard Radio. He is a guest of the famous singer Celestina Warbeck, and also he has cooperated with the Ministries of Magic in various countries and participated in the reconstruction of at least 3 Ministries of Magic. This past Halloween, he participated in the Carcassonne Alchemy Symposium in France. Only the top alchemists received invitations. Quote. So for a busy person like him, West returned to normal volume, it would be great if he could spare time to teach us on time every week. It is impossible for him to live in the school like other professors, and he basically won't. Coming to the school auditorium for dinner is a very wise choice for you to start learning alchemy from now on. This way, you will definitely become famous when you officially study with Professor Murray in the 6th grade, and maybe you will be accepted as a real apprentice by him. Reach the sky in one step. How can you reach the sky in one step? West's friend Benson said suddenly. He appeared out of nowhere with messy hair and even unwashed toothpaste on his face. He casually grabbed a pie from the table, and without waiting for West's reply, he urged, "Hurry up, if you go late, you won't be able to get a good seat." "Wait a minute." West took out his wand and cast clean up on him, and then said, "Why are you so anxious? The game between Gryffindor and Slytherin only starts in half an hour. Besides, they are all flying in the air, aren't they the same wherever they sit?" "How can it be the same? If there are only seats left behind the pillars, we won't be able to see the wonderful scenes. And I don't want to sit with Slytherin," Benson muttered, dragging West and striding towards the court. "Walk." West turned around and greeted, "Well, Vader, you'd better hurry up." Before he could finish speaking, he was pulled out of the auditorium. Only then did Wade realize that the reason why there were so few people in the auditorium was not because many students were sleeping in, but because most of them went to the Quidditch pitch. He had experienced so many things from last night to now that he had completely forgotten that the first Quidditch match was today. After Benson urged West to leave, the few students in the auditorium seemed to realize that time was running out, and they hurried out the door. Vader drank a glass of hot water that appeared in front of him out of thin air, and then walked to the Quidditch pitch. Almost all the students from the school are here, and many of them are holding binoculars in order to see the game clearly. The stands were packed, and the seats were raised into the air one by one. Students from Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were mixed with Gryffindors, while Slytherins were huddled alone. In the top row, the Gryffindor students hung a huge banner with the letters, "Potter must win," flashing in different colors, and someone also drew a vivid lion on it. Players from both teams filed out of the locker rooms, and students in the entire stadium were shouting and applauding. There were only a few hundred people, but they seemed to roar with the momentum of a stadium filled with thousands of people. The players were like NBA stars, accepting the acceptance of their respective colleges, of encouragement and cheer. Wade climbed to the top of the stands first and quickly found his target. Several professors who came to the stadium to watch the game, probably because they didn't want to be crowded with the students, they all gathered in the same area. Especially Professor Snape, who looks like a black crow, is easy to find. So Vader soon saw Quirrell. He was very close to Professor Snape, with a big scarf wrapped around his head, and he was looking intently at Harry Potter, who was riding on his broom, with a look on his pale face. She was blushing, as if she was also infected by the warm atmosphere of the scene. With Madame Hooch's whistle, the players from both teams quickly flew into the sky and turned into small black dots in the blink of an eye. Almost all the students in the stands stood up subconsciously, looking up, trying to identify the players from both teams, and occasionally exclaiming as the battle progressed. Wade squeezed through the crowd with difficulty, listening to the passionate commentary of Gryffindor student Lee Jordan. Flint didn't score. Gryffindor goalkeeper Wood made a beautiful move to break the ball. As the players of the two teams attacked and defended back and forth, Wade had squeezed to the stand where the professors were, and then under the cover of the students on both sides, he quietly stretched out his wand, and then waved it quickly. Quirrell was applauding Gryffindor's goal, smiling with the professors next to him, completely ignoring Snape's dark face not far away. Just as he was secretly preparing to cast a spell on Harry Potter's broom, his body suddenly pounced out, rolling uncontrollably along the stands, and even knocked down several students. It looked like Professor Quirrell accidentally fell down because he was too excited while watching the game. Everyone helped them up, and saw Quirrell covering his nose with his hands, and 2 lines of blood were flowing down his nose. "How are you, Professor Quirrell?" Professor Sprout asked with concern. At the same time, Lee Jordan's ecstatic voice sounded. Harry Potter caught the golden snitch. Gryffindor won by 170 points to 20 points. This is a great victory. Great Harry Potter. He defeated the Slytherin team in his first time as a Seeker. Quirrell, with blood all over his face, turned his head suddenly and stared blankly at the Gryffindor team celebrating, completely forgetting to hide his suddenly ugly face. Fortunately, People were cheering and almost no one noticed his change in expression. Almost, because Professor Snape, who also had a livid face, was staring at him gloomily. Behind Quirrell, separated by several walls of people, Wade quietly retracted his wand. He took a last look at Quirrell and returned to the castle with the excited students. Ever since he overheard the conversation between Quirrell and the pendant version of Voldemort, Vader no longer went into those remote and uninhabited corners. When there are no classes, he spends most of his time in the Umbrella House. Fortunately, Michael's enthusiasm for Quidditch finally subsided, probably because Ravenclaw lost to Hufflepuff in the game and 2 students were injured, which made him feel that Quidditch was not that interesting. During the Defense Against the Dark Arts course, Vader paid close attention to Quirrell. When facing students, Professor Quirrell is still the timid and pitiful Quirrell. When a naughty student asked about the scene where he fell on the stand, he just said awkwardly and stammered, I didn't pay attention, it seemed, someone pushed me. The students all had expressions of disbelief on their faces. Which student would dare to play a prank on the professor? They all felt that Quirrell must have been too excited to stand still, but they were embarrassed to admit it. Of course, no one would doubt this matter on Wade. He has always been a representative of a good student in everyone's mind. He respects professors, studies seriously, never causes trouble, and is a typical Ravenclaw. After class, Padma quickly packed her school bag and ran over excitedly and asked, "Go to the Umbrella House to do your homework." Quirrell's teaching level is not very good, but his ability to retain homework is almost on par with Professor Snape. Every time he has to write a paper that is more than 1 foot long, even a Ravenclaw student will have a headache. But after Padma studied at the Umbrella House for a period of time, she felt as if she had mastered the code of writing a thesis, and even enjoyed it. Probably because after finishing her homework quickly, her inflated sense of superiority would bring her great happiness when she looked at her classmates who were complaining that they had a lot of homework, it was difficult to write, and they were scratching their heads with worry. Wade saw her chatting with people in the auditorium more than once. "How much homework do you have left?" There's so much left to write. I finished writing the paper in only 40 minutes yesterday. It feels pretty simple. Why didn't you even write the beginning? Did you not pay attention to the lecture?" After a few times, everyone stopped talking to her, and Padma always stayed with her sister. But judging from Parvati's expression, the reason why she endured Padma's showing off was to use her homework as a reference. Wade wanted to persuade her not to always be so Versailles, but Michael looked at the smile on Padma's face at the other end of the long table, and then said, "Don't you think she's cute like this? It's like her face is full of it says, 'Am I awesome?' and 'Come and praise me.'" He laughed unconsciously. Stupid and smart, just like a child. Okay. Vader swallowed what he was about to say. He wondered if his mentality was too old and his thinking was too realistic, so he didn't know how to appreciate the silly cuteness of this little girl. Padma was happily looking forward to going to the Umbrella House, but behind her, Michael was winking at Vader. Vader glanced over there, then turned back and said, "You guys go ahead, I have some questions to ask Professor Flitwick." Michael was overjoyed and gave a thumbs up and then curled it twice to express his gratitude. Padma was a little disappointed. Okay. The two of them left together, and Wade was packing his things and heading to the 7th floor. He was not deliberately creating opportunities for Michael, but he really wanted to see Professor Flitwick for something. Professor Flitwick's office is on the 7th floor. Students usually don't climb up such a high floor, so it's very quiet. In the long corridor, only the portraits murmured from time to time. Speaking of which, Wade had never seen another portrait as active as Griffith's. Most of the portraits in the castle just stretched or turned their heads, and some never saw them leave their portraits. For example, Miss Claudia. Vader came to an oak door with an eagle carved on it. When it saw Vader, it flapped its wings and said as if to itself, "Vade Grey is here to visit." After a moment, it said, "Enter aloud." The oak door slid open and Wade stepped inside. The style of Professor Flitwick's office is exactly the same as that of Ravenclaw Tower. The room is an arched structure, surrounded by 13 windows, which can see Ravenclaw Tower and Owl Tower. The sunlight shines through the colored glass, reflecting colorful light and shadow on the ground. Most of the furniture in the room was mini, just right for Professor Flitwick's height. Only the bookshelf is particularly magnificent. Hundreds of books are stacked from the floor to the ceiling. There are also thick piles of parchment piled on the floor. Most of them are notes compiled by Professor Flitwick himself. He sometimes lends them to others. Wade currently has 2 books in his school bag about his favorite students. "Oh, Vader." Professor Flitwick's voice came from above his head. Vader looked up and saw that the professor was standing on a tall, automatically sliding ladder. The ladder shrunk step by step, and finally turned into a low step, and Professor Flitwick jumped directly from it. He said happily, "I am very satisfied with your paper on the softening curse. Son, do you have any new questions today?" "Yes." Wade took out the notes he had borrowed before and said, "I have finished learning standard spells, level 3 inches, and I would like you to test my level." "No problem. Cast a happy spell first," Professor Flitwick said. In the following time, Wade demonstrated more than a dozen spells that the 3rd graders would learn, and all of them were successful at once. Professor Flitwick was so excited that he almost fainted. Oh, Wade, you are definitely a genius," he said repeatedly. "It's only been 3 months. I watched you go from knowing nothing to today's level. The progress is too fast. In this way, you can reach the level of OWLs in less than a year. You will definitely become a great figure in the future." Wade smiled and said, "Professor, I want to continue to borrow textbooks and notes for the 4th grade. Of course, I've been prepared for a long time. I know you will definitely finish it before the Christmas holiday." Professor Flitwick waved his wand, and several books flew over from the table. It was the standard spells, 4th grade, that Professor Flitwick had used before, as well as the materials he consulted for teaching students, the lesson plans he prepared, and the excellent papers left by previous students. Professor Flitwick has been teaching at Hogwarts for decades, and has long reached the state of only needing to bring a wand to class, but he has never thrown away the things he wrote in the early years. Instead, he carefully sorted them out and kept them, and he is still repairing them intermittently until now. Wade's eyes can help him learn a spell quickly. But the same fire spell can only be used by some people to light a cigarette, some people can light a bonfire, and some people can burn a city. This is the difference in power. In terms of control, some people's fire spells will inexplicably blow themselves up, while others can control the flames after they are lit, allowing them to deform, burn, and extinguish at will. The reason for this difference is not only the difference in magic power, but also the wizard's understanding of the essence of the spell. Wade's eyes let him learn. Textbooks and books in the library are all for him to understand, but Professor Flitwick's information here allows him to touch the line of control. Chapter 31. After borrowing the book, Wade continued to ask questions. The content of charms was explained in detail in Professor Flitwick's book, so he asked about spells related to defense against the dark arts, such as the Iron Armor Curse and the Disarming Curse, obstacle spells, etc. Everyone knows what level the Defense Against the Dark Arts course at Hogwarts is. Professor Flitwick did not let him ask Quirrell for advice. Instead, he answered the question in detail and patiently, and finally lent him a few more books. Wade was very grateful. There is only one wizarding school in the UK, Hogwarts. The professors in the school do not examine KPIs, nor publicly compare pass rates and excellence rates, nor do they conduct year-end assessments or performance appraisals. The professors in the school are really all there are those who teach according to their conscience. Some are serious and responsible, some are just dawdling around all day, and some are just taking whatever classes they want according to their moods, completely ignoring the fact that the students have to take the wizard level exam. After asking the question, Wade remembered Griffith's commission and asked, "Professor, there is a portrait complaining that his current place is too deserted, and he wants me to help him move to the lively foyer. Is that okay?" Professor Flitwick asked, "Is it a portrait of someone with a position?" Some portraits in Hogwarts serve as guards, such as the portrait of the fat lady outside the Gryffindor common room, which naturally cannot be moved easily. Wade thought for a while. Probably not. He said that he was originally in the foyer, but later moved to the astronomy tower to make room for other portraits. "Oh, I know who you are talking about." Professor Flitwick smiled. The reason why Griffiths was moved out was mainly because many portraits complained that he affected their sleep and was an instigator. He played a prank on the Ministry of Magic officials who came to inspect the school. The principal and professor at the time thought he should be taught a lesson, so they moved him to the most deserted place in the school. Quote. What about his request? Wade asked tentatively. It's not a sin to like liveliness, Professor Flitwick said tolerantly. As long as he promises not to encourage Peeves to cause trouble again, you can change his place. But I'm afraid it won't work in the entrance hall. Many of the portraits in the entrance hall are in line. Griffiths has an opinion. Oh, okay. But I really don't understand why they don't like pranks. Pranks can bring a lot of joy to people. While Griffiths defended himself, he quickly moved back and forth between the several portraits around him. Hey, old man, I'm leaving now. Shalom, I'd be happy if you wrote to me while you were doing your calculations, though I don't know if I'll get it. Barry, and dear Francisco, thank you for your hospitality. This is a return gift. After taking off the portrait, Vader watched helplessly as Griffiths turned the old stargazer's telescope 180 degrees, snatched away the quill and ink from the spectacled witch, and finally poured the ink on a bear. On the child's head, a quill was inserted into the nostrils of another naughty child. After provoking all the portraits, he quickly rushed back to his own portrait and loudly urged Wade, go. Go. But why do portraits care about spatial distance? Although Vader had already left the corridor with the portraits in his arms, the characters in the portraits still chased into Griffith's territory, held down the red-haired wizard and beat him up. The spectacled witch was so furious for the first time that she kicked Griffiths hard with her feet and screamed, "Do you know how long I have been counting? How long have I been counting?" The naughty children seemed to use Griffiths as a trampoline, jumping up and down on him and shouting loudly. The old stargazing man finally caught up and hammered him twice with all his strength. Then he seemed to have reached his waist. He held on to his waist and went back with a look of pain on his face. Vader naturally cannot interfere with the fight between the people in the portrait. After everyone dispersed, he looked at Griffiths, who looked like a puddle of mud, and asked helplessly, "You were about to leave, and why are you getting such a beating?" "Ha ha, you don't understand." Griffiths turned over with the footprints on his forehead, lying on the grass in the valley, laughing happily. "Isn't this the best farewell ceremony?" Vader really didn't understand. Griffith put his hands behind his head, looked at the sky and said, "I don't want to leave quietly, so it may take a long time for them to realize, the red-haired guy seems to be missing. I don't want it either. There will be sadness and tears when saying goodbye, there will be a lot of fights, and everyone will be happy at the end. Isn't that great?" Vader thought for a moment. "So, everyone has achieved happiness, only your injured world has achieved it, is that right?" Griffiths was stunned for a moment, then burst out laughing. "Wade, it turns out you know humor too." As he smiled, the messy scene in the portrait slowly recovered. The footprints on Griffith's body disappeared, the torn robe was restored, the trampled flowers and grass straightened up, and the broken branches on the tree grew back. Only the bruises on his face had not completely disappeared. "Griffith, you must be a Gryffindor yourself, right?" Wade asked while hanging the portrait on the wall. "Of course. You can tell it at a glance, right?" Griffiths picked up the frame and tried to look around. "What is this place?" "You can't go back to the foyer. This is the only way from the auditorium to the library. Almost all students pass by here every day. Your request should be met," Wade said. "Oh, not bad, not bad." Griffiths was very satisfied. In the corridor, some portraits quietly observed this newcomer, and some even gathered together to whisper. Hermione happened to pass by with a pile of books, and there were two familiar people beside her, Harry and Ron. Several people probably just came back from the library and were arguing in a low voice. "I bet my flying broom that it must be Snape who let the troll in. He wanted to steal the things guarded by the three-headed dog," Harry said with bated breath. "No, he won't," Hermione said angrily. "You can't make malicious assumptions about the school's professors. Hermione, to be honest, you always think that the teachers in the school are saints." Ron said impatiently, "But I said, I saw it with my own eyes. When the troll appeared, I went to find you, and I saw Snape sneaking upstairs with my own eyes. Harry also saw Snape's leg bitten and bleeding. Why do you ignore these facts and believe him just because he is a professor?" "I believe him not only because he is a professor at the school, but also because of Dumbledore. If he was a bad guy, Dumbledore would not have been able to see it for more than 10 years. Hermione strode angrily. No longer wanting to argue with them, she shouted, "Hey, Wade, are you going to study? Let's go together." Okay. Hermione's attitude made people dare not refuse at all. Wade nodded at Harry and Ron, turned around and left with Hermione. Unreasonable, isn't it? Ron frowned and said, "Can't Dumbledore be deceived by Snape? Even Merlin was deceived sometimes." Harry nodded silently. He always believed that Snape was the bad guy. "Good afternoon, students." An enthusiastic voice came from the wall. "You are all Gryffindors, right?" "I am also a Gryffindor." "I am Griffiths, what about you?" Ron said. "He is Harry Potter, I am Ron Weasley." "I don't think we have seen you before." "Yes, because I just moved here today." Griffiths recalled. "Weasley and Potter, I seem to have known wizards with this surname before, they should be your ancestors, right?" Really? Even Harry became interested now, and the two temporarily forgot the previous topic and chatted with the portraits on the wall. In addition to spells and transfiguration, Wade spent the most time on alchemy. While learning alchemy, he was also constantly deepening his understanding of several courses. The book, Learning to Make Magical Items from Scratch, that Professor Murray lent him was completely different from other alchemy books. There was almost no boring history and theory, and there was no extensive writing on the relationship between the four elements. Instead, it started from the first line of words and talked about how to make various magic items. From the common automatic ink-filling feather pen, moving photos, flying brooms, and howlers, to the pensieve, magic mirror, invisible cloak, and guardian armor that few people could own, almost all the magic items Wade had seen or heard of could be found in the book. It even mentioned the sorting hat and the time converter, but the latter only had some guesses, but no specific manufacturing process. And the magic items mentioned above could not be made by reading books, just like people who don't understand electricity or programming can't make a computer even if they have the full set of manufacturing processes. The complexity and danger of magic items far exceeds that of computers. Without the corresponding basic knowledge, even the simplest steps cannot be understood. Wade studied with Professor Murray for several weeks, and listened to his comments on the homework and works of the 6th and 7th grade students every time. He also helped Professor Murray make a teaching aid for his class as an assistant. After a period of training, Professor Murray suggested that he could try to make the simplest magic items by himself. As long as 3 or 5 spells are properly matched, some wonderful effects can be produced, such as the automatic ink-filling feather pen and the howling letter. Some ideas popped up in Wade's mind, such as he could let the feather pen automatically change the color of the ink when writing, or add the function of measuring the distance on the glasses, or make a dancing puppet. Almost at the same time as the association, the manufacturing spell and specific steps were generated in his mind. The spells and magic runes to be used are very basic, he has completely mastered them, and he should be able to succeed after practicing a few times at most. Wade has such confidence, but is he really going to do this? In this case, what is the difference between his work and those student works that Professor Murray called garbage? They are all just copying others' ideas, completing the homework perfunctorily, but the work has little value. This was Wade's first alchemy work. He didn't want to be so casual, nor did he want to end up in a garbage dump after handing in his homework. At night, Wade's mind was full of thoughts, and he never fell into a dream. Between half asleep and half awake, he suddenly heard a rustling sound. Wade sat up from the bed, took out his wand and waved it, and the oil lamp in the dormitory was lit, quietly emitting orange-yellow light. It was very quiet inside and outside the dormitory, and there was a slight sound outside the window. Wade put on his clothes and got out of bed, walked to the window, and then he found that it was snowing outside. The goose feather snow fell, and the whole castle was shrouded in pure white. The thick snow covered all the messy things, and there was an extremely quiet and empty feeling. Wade's mind flashed, and he suddenly thought of what he was going to do. When this idea came up, all other ideas seemed so fancy and superficial. He returned to bed in a good mood and had a deep dream until dawn. Wade originally thought that he had already done something outrageous by throwing Quirrell and making his face bleed, but he didn't expect that this was nothing at all, because the Weasley twins soon did something even more heart-pounding. They cast a spell on several snowballs, letting them chase Quirrell around and finally hit him on the back of the head. Professor McGonagall was furious, and rushed out of the hall directly, deducting a full 30 points from the twins, that is, her own college. They were also punished with a month of detention, half a month before the Christmas holiday, and another half a month after the holiday. The Weasley twins pretended to be repentant and apologized seriously, but as soon as they left the professor's sight, they became complacent. "Why are you targeting Quirrell?" Wade asked curiously while standing in the corridor. For someone like him who knew the truth, the two's actions just now were simply pulling teeth from the tiger's mouth. And although the Weasley brothers liked to play pranks, there was no reason for them to provoke the professor. After all, Gryffindors attach great importance to the score of the House Cup because they will definitely be laughed at by Slytherin if they fall behind in the score, and even if Professor Quirrell deducted 200 points from them just now, no one would say anything. Wade was very surprised. When did they become so ignorant? The Weasleys stared at him for a while, and showed an expression of remembering something. "Ah, you are. The library. What's your name?" the two brothers asked together. "Wade Grey, from Ravenclaw College," Wade said. The twins suddenly realized they had heard this name countless times from their youngest brother Ron. Every time after class with Ravenclaw College, Ron would talk about how a little wizard named Wade in the same grade was appreciated by the professors, and he must be the next Percy. But from what they saw, Wade Grey was completely different from their brother Percy, and like them, he was an alchemy enthusiast, which made him very fond of him. The Weasleys looked at each other, then came over and said, "Aren't you curious? Quirrell always wears that big scarf. No matter how the weather changes, he never takes it off. We went to the kitchen and asked the house elves, and he didn't even ask them to clean the scarf. So there must be some secret hidden under his scarf. No one can know it," Fred Weasley said firmly. "Maybe it was some dark magic weapon that damaged his brain. It could also be an extremely ugly man with diarrhea." George Weasley couldn't help but laugh. "Think about that scene, it must be very funny." "Don't bully Professor Quirrell just because he's easy to talk to," Vader politely advised in a Hermione-like tone. "Do you dare to loosen Professor McGonagall's bun? Don't say such scary things, okay?" Fred put his arm around Vader's shoulders with a familiar look. "And I also discovered something strange. Do you know what it is?" "What?" George asked in a flattering tone. "I found out." Fred looked at Vader and said in a long voice, "We have all talked about the suspicion about Quirrell's scarf, but you don't seem to be curious at all." Wade's heart skipped a beat, and he suddenly realized that underneath the jovial attitude of the two brothers, there was an extremely keen intuition hidden behind them. His eyes changed slightly, and George noticed it immediately. He raised his eyebrows slightly and asked, "So you know?" Vader crossed his arms, took a step back and leaned against the wall, squinting at the Weasleys. "So, this is an interrogation?" George and Fred looked at each other and laughed at the same time. "Of course not. You found the answer to the question earlier than we did, so we lost," Fred said seriously. "But it's impossible to interrogate or anything. We will find out the answer ourselves." George showed a bright smile. Vade likes the Weasley twins very much. They are the kind of people who will try to bring joy to others even in the most desperate situation. He originally just wanted to stop them from continuing to commit suicide, but looking at their bright expressions, he couldn't help but think, why should I hide the truth for Voldemort? Voldemort tried every means to hide his true identity because he was afraid of Dumbledore. What good would it be for Vader to help him hide it? On the contrary, if Vader is the only one who knows a secret, then once the other party finds out, his situation will be very dangerous. But if the secret is spread, it will be Voldemort who will be in trouble. Thinking of this, the entangled mood of hiding the secret suddenly became clear. But Vader didn't want to really spread the news completely, leaving Voldemort with no way out. After all, Dumbledore couldn't kill him completely now. Voldemort only hid his identity in school to seize the Philosopher's Stone. What if he found that he had no hope of seizing it, and he went on a killing spree in anger? The students in the school were no match for him at all. "I don't know how many people would die before Dumbledore arrived," he said carefully. "Actually." The Weasley twins' eyes lit up. "Let's find a quiet place to talk." For Wade, the safest place besides his dormitory is the Umbrella House. He remembered that there was a hidden room of requirement in this school, but when Wade watched the movie, he only paid attention to the plot and special effects and didn't pay attention to the specific location of the room of requirement. So now he has been looking for it for 3 months, but he still hasn't found it. In order to avoid the same situation as the movie plot when the protagonist is talking about a crucial secret, there is a pair of eavesdropping ears behind him, which leaks the secret to the villain, causing a series of tragedies. They came to the Umbrella House. The holiday is about to start, and everyone's enthusiasm for learning has also decreased. At this time, there are only 2 people in the Umbrella House. Hermione is almost blocked by the high pile of books, and she looks exhausted from reading, and Ryan brought a pile of wood and is making a new target. Wow, is this your secret base? Fred was the first to stick his head in and look around. Soon, a red-haired head came in beside him, took a look and greeted him, saying, "Hello, Miss Know-It-All." "Oh, I'm not good," Hermione said depressedly. "Does anyone know who Nick Flamel is? He is not in the Great Wizards of the 20th Century, or the Directory of Contemporary Famous Magicians. His name cannot be found in Major Discoveries in Modern Magic, and Research on the Development of Modern Witchcraft. I have almost flipped through 100 books. Is he not written into the book at all?" Several people inside and outside the room were stunned at the same time, and then said in unison, "What are you talking about, Hermione? That's Nick Flamel, of course he is in the book." Hermione slowly raised her head and blinked, with a rare look of distressing confusion on her face. "You all know Nick Flamel?" "Of course." Ryan lifted up a target and said, "He celebrated his 665th birthday last year, and it was published in the Daily Prophet. My father said he might be the oldest person in the world." 665 years old. Hermione repeated in disbelief. Fred said, "Nick Flamel is the greatest alchemist, and the only Philosopher's Stone in the world was made by him." Philosopher's Stone. Hermione thought she must have seen this term in that book. George said, "The Philosopher's Stone can turn any metal into pure gold, and it can also make the elixir of life. My biggest dream when I was a child was to own a Philosopher's Stone." Turning stone into gold. Immortality. Hermione repeated. Wade, who turned around and closed the door, couldn't help but complain, "Hermione, have you become a repeater?" Although Fred and others didn't know about repeaters, the meaning was simple and easy to understand, and they all laughed out loud. Hermione looked at Wade eagerly. "So Wade, you don't know Nick Flamel, do you?" Wade explained simply, "I've been learning alchemy recently, and the first thing I read was his work." Alchemy. Ryan was surprised. "That's a 6th grade course." "Yes, but I can start to lay the foundation from now on." Wade asked, "Isn't Theo with you today?" "He went to help Professor Sprout clean up the greenhouse. I remembered that the target that was broken last time could not be repaired, so I just made a few new ones." Ryan explained, patted his clothes, put down his sleeves and walked over, picked up the water cup and drank water. Wade gave him a clean-up to get rid of the tiny wood chips. Fred sat astride the chair and poked Hermione. "Hello. Are you okay? Are you still alive? Do you know what day it is?" Hermione, who was lying on the table, stretched out her hand and slapped Fred's hand that was waving in front of her eyes. She sat up and said angrily, "If I had known, I would have asked directly. I have been looking for more than a month." Wade flipped through the books on her table, all of which were about modern and contemporary magic history. Of course, Nicholas Flamel could not be found in this way. He was born in France in the 14th century and was written in an earlier book. "Hermione, why do you want to check Nicholas Flamel?" Ryan asked with concern. When Wade was not around, Hermione always generously answered everyone's questions, and everyone had long regarded her as a true friend. I just. Hermione originally wanted to say it was nothing, because explaining the reason revealed that they violated the rules and broke into the restricted area in the middle of the night, but when she raised her head, she saw that everyone around her was looking at her with concern. She has magnanimous eyes and a sincere expression. This made her feel extremely ashamed for her concealment. "It's like this." Hermione hesitated, and finally told them about their adventure, and how she, Harry and Ron went to visit the gamekeeper Hagrid after the Quidditch match. Zhang let them know that the thing guarded by the 3-headed dog was related to Dumbledore and Nick Flamel. It seems that the big dog must be guarding Flamel's Philosopher's Stone. Hermione finally concluded. "I dare say Flamel asked Dumbledore to keep it for him. He knew that someone was paying attention to the Philosopher's Stone, and he was friends with Dumbledore, so the Sorcerer's Stone was placed in Hogwarts." Hermione glanced at Vader and did not say what Vader had guessed last time, although she now felt more and more that Vader was right. The whole thing might have been a test given by Dumbledore to Harry, but let other people know that Vader was right. Students knew that the headmaster was giving special treatment to a particular student, which was not a good thing for Harry. What it means to be in the limelight, just look at how Harry, who had just entered school, was chased and intercepted by his classmates. Hermione knew that her friend had been deeply troubled by this. Then who's thinking about the Philosopher's Stone? Ryan asked. Hermione said. Harry and Ron both thought it was Snape because his leg seemed to have been bitten by a three-headed dog. But I think. Before she finished speaking, George suddenly said, Kiluo. Hermione was stuck for 2 seconds before saying, what does it have to do with Professor Quirrell? Although I don't think he is very qualified. The Weasleys looked at Vader. Wade thought for a while, and did not mention what he knew about the plot. He just repeated what he heard that day word for word. He has a good memory in this life, and even though more than a month has passed, there is almost no deviation in the retelling of the conversation. Invisibly, there seemed to be a chill rising from the soles of my feet. There was a long silence in the umbrella house, and no one spoke for a long time. Finally, Fred broke the silence. I gotta say, this joke isn't funny at all. Did you get it, George? George nodded silently, his face unusually pale. So, Ryan struggled to understand and frowned. Professor Quirrell is not Professor Quirrell. No, should I say, a dark wizard has possessed him. He wants to kill Harry Potter. We the defense against the dark arts professor is a Death Eater. He looked around at everyone, as if expecting someone to suddenly shout, did it scare you? Ha ha ha. But no one spoke. Ryan sat down holding the table, and after a while he said with hope, should we go find Professor Dumbledore? All Death Eaters are afraid of him. As long as Professor Dumbledore takes action, we will definitely be able to. Hermione shook her head slightly and said softly, no, you don't understand, Ryan, he stepped on my corpse and became a big star. Think about this, Ryan, who else would say that? Woolen cloth. The blood disappeared from the boy's face bit by bit. Ryan clenched his fists and his body trembled slightly. But, it's impossible, that person is dead, isn't it? Everyone knows that he is dead, by Harry Potter. He seemed to have bitten his tongue suddenly, and his voice stopped abruptly. Hermione looked at him pityingly. She could tell that the boy actually believed it, but he just didn't dare to admit it. It seems that if you don't admit it, that person will not be resurrected. This was nothing to laugh at, for she too felt a shiver. Hermione, who was born in the Muggle world, should have had no interest in Voldemort, but she had read a lot of books before entering the wizarding world, so she understood better than most students born in wizarding families, that, whose name must not be mentioned, man, has caused many shocking tragedies. Before that man disappeared, his power had reached its peak, and a terrifying shadow shrouded the entire British Isles. Even Dumbledore. The world said that the man was most afraid of Dumbledore, because the war never stopped. Burning to Hogwarts, but not even Dumbledore could stop the series of deaths. This made Hermione subconsciously have a deep fear of that person, but when she wanted to say his name, she opened her mouth, but couldn't say it directly. It seems like it will awaken some terrible monster. Float. I mean, the mysterious man. Hermione looked at everyone and said, if the mysterious man is really possessed by Professor Quirrell, I think we should tell Dumbledore. Vader, why did you do that at that time? Didn't you find Professor Dumbledore immediately? Vader thought for a while. Maybe it's because I find it hard to believe that Dumbledore knows nothing about this. Fred nodded. Dumbledore must have discovered Quirrell's abnormality, but for some reason, he has not dealt with it. George said seriously. He knows everything. But what if? Hermione asked back. What if Dumbledore is just suspicious but still looking for evidence? He may think that Professor Quirrell just surrendered to the darkness and doesn't know that the mysterious man is in him. We should find Dumbledore, tell the truth, and let him decide what to do. Of course, Hermione, you are right. Ryan said, of course it should be done. Then why don't we act now? Fred stood up resolutely. I saw Dumbledore in the auditorium during dinner. He must be at school now. But Hermione didn't expect him to be so decisive. She asked hesitantly, should we call Harry? I mean, the person the mysterious man wants to kill is him. Harry should know where the danger will come from. Vader thought for a moment. Like you said, Hermione, let Dumbledore decide. Hermione thought about the test, he said and nodded silently, her eyes full of worry. as if she was worried that Harry would be killed by Voldemort on their way to find Dumbledore. Standing in the corridor, Wade took out a bright silver whistle and blew it. A loud whistle penetrated the air sharply and urgently, and after a while, an owl spread its wings and flew over from the west tower, passed through the window, and landed accurately on Wade's outstretched arm. "Cool," Fred whistled. The owl Ava tilted her head and glanced at him, then called, "Cuckoo," twice. Vader rolled up the written note and let Ava hold it in her mouth. He warned, "Give it to Professor Dumbledore, and then bring me his reply." Ava nodded, spread her wings and flew away. Everyone watched as it circled in the sky, then spotted the window on a small spire and flew in. Hermione bit her finger and said worriedly, "Professor Dumbledore will not take our letter seriously, right? Maybe I should write a more detailed letter in the letter to let him know that we are not messing around." Fortunately, Dumbledore didn't keep them waiting for too long, maybe only a minute or two, before Ava flew out of the window again. The owl handed the reply to Wade. On the parchment, it was written in a long, thin, circle with circle font. "Welcome to my office. The password is Cascading Sunday." "Cascading Sunday," George muttered. "I don't think I've seen this dessert in the auditorium." Fred said, "There was one at the end of term dinner last semester." "What were you doing then? By the way, you secretly stuffed a bottle of cockroaches into Mr. Monta's body." Let him think he bought a pile of cockroaches. George remembered the prank at the time and laughed. He never ate cockroaches again after that. "Wait, you took the opportunity to steal my sundae. How can you say it's stealing?" Fred argued. "I took it openly, but you didn't see it." The two of them were playing and joking, and they came to the entrance of the principal's office together. On the way, they happened to meet Michael, who was coming back from the Quidditch field. He greeted him and naturally integrated into the team. No one thought there was anything wrong. There was an extremely ugly stone gargoyle crouching at the entrance of the principal's office. Fred avoided George's attack, jumped to the front and said, "Colorful Sunday." The stone beast jumped to the side, and the wall behind it split in two. Behind it was a slowly rising spiral staircase. Several people walked in one after another, and there was a bang behind them, and the wall closed again. The stairs took everyone higher and higher, and Wade was secretly amazed in his heart. In the Muggle world, escalators are of course very common, but this is the first time he has seen such a thing in the wizarding world. So why should we be the same as Muggles in this regard? The elevator is always installed where the principal needs it. When everyone was a little dizzy because of the stairs, they finally saw a shining oak door with a brass door knocker in the shape of a griffin. "This is Dumbledore's office." Fred strode forward, knocked on the knocker, and the oak door opened silently. Dumbledore's office is very strange. The walls are covered with portraits of old headmasters. Some are sleeping, some are looking at them with interest, and some have only an empty frame. The long-legged table, covered with curious silverware, whirled and puffed out small puffs of smoke. The sorting hat was placed on a board and seemed to be asleep, making a slight snoring sound. Behind the door, on a tall gilded perch, stood an extremely beautiful bird. Its feathers are golden and red, and although they are a little sparse, they are still dazzlingly beautiful, and its eyes look down at everyone with very smart eyes. "Oh my God," Hermione whispered. "It's actually a phoenix. I read in a book that Professor Dumbledore has a real phoenix." Albus Dumbledore sat behind the table, wearing a pair of half-moon glasses on his aquiline nose and wearing a dark purple robe printed with fleur-de-lis. He sat on a high-backed chair and looked at everyone gently with light blue eyes. "Welcome, kids. I hope you're not bored in my office." "How so? This place is so interesting, Professor," Fred said boldly and lively. Dumbledore chuckled softly and said, "You said in your letter that you have something very important to tell me. You can tell me now." Everyone looked at each other and urged with their eyes. Hermione also chickened out at this point, as she too had been forced to violate the ban and was reluctant to surrender. In the end, Wade had no choice but to stand up and repeat the conversation he had heard before. Others added to their guesses. Michael's face gradually turned pale. He didn't expect that they were going to the principal's office to talk about such a serious matter. He looked from this to that, feeling as if he was the only shocked person at the scene. Dumbledore didn't show any surprise after listening patiently. His eyes that seemed to be able to see through people's hearts turned to Wade and asked, "When you heard this conversation, are you sure he didn't notice it?" I had used the fire spell before that. I don't know if he noticed any traces of the spell. But as soon as Professor Quirrell entered the door, I hid. I couldn't be seen from the angle of the window. Wade said carefully. Before he left, I made sure that I made no noise, did not use magic, and had no obvious smell on my body. I waited outside the window until early morning before going back, and on the way out I met Griffith's portrait. And Professor Murray. In the subsequent defense against the dark arts class, Professor Quirrell did not pay special attention to me, and his attitude did not change significantly. Quote. Dumbledore nodded slightly and added, for the time being, it seems that he has not noticed it. But I want you to remember one thing. From today on, try not to think about this matter, and don't look at Professor Quirrell. Do you understand? Wade nodded silently. Professor. Ryan couldn't help but ask, why don't you catch him? Before he knows he has been exposed. It's not yet time, Mr. Caro. Dumbledore said patiently. Actually, at the beginning of this semester, I found that some heartbreaking changes seemed to have happened in our Professor Quirrell. The information I brought also confirmed my worst suspicions, but it's not time to expose him yet. But don't worry, I asked a very reliable person to monitor him and ensure the safety of the students. So Professor, is he really? George asked softly. I think so. Dumbledore confirmed their guess. Voldemort has returned to this school again, in a state that no one can imagine. But he probably didn't expect that his wonderful disguise would be used by a few of you. A child discovered that he always has a habit of looking down on those who are not as powerful as himself. Oh, in fact, your performance is very good. But, didn't everyone say that Voldemort was killed by Harry Potter when he was still a baby? Fred asked. He was indeed severely wounded and disappeared from sight on the night he tried to kill Harry. But he was not really dead, I have always been sure of that. Dumbledore said. Voldemort is now in a rare state, even the death curse cannot easily kill him. Fred looked confused, but Dumbledore had no intention of explaining in detail. Professor, can I tell Harry this? Hermione asked carefully. I don't think so, Miss Granger, Dumbledore said politely and unquestioningly. But, since Voldemort killed Harry's parents, I don't think it's a good idea to let him know that his enemy is right in front of him. Dumbledore said, I'm afraid Harry won't be able to deal with it calmly and rationally like you. This will give him a huge risk, so I need you to keep it secret, especially to Harry, can you do that? Everyone nodded together. Fred muttered, but the mysterious man wants to kill him. In order to ensure safety, do we have to let Harry leave the team? Wood will cry. George forced a smile. He said that Harry was the best seeker he had ever seen. He pinned all his hopes of winning the championship on Harry. Oh, about that. Dumbledore crossed his arms and smiled and said, I don't think you should give up the joy of Quidditch just for the eyes of the dark. So, yes, Harry does not have to leave the team, I will ensure his safety. After getting his assurance, the Gryffindors were relieved immediately, in the hearts of the little lions, who could be more reliable than Dumbledore. Several people happily prepared to say goodbye, and when they were about to leave, Ryan hesitated and stopped. Professor Dumbledore, what? One more thing. Ryan hesitated and hesitated. Just say it, Mr. Caro. Professor Quirrell. Ryan mustered up his courage and looked up and asked, after you drive away the mysterious man, what will happen to Professor Quirrell? Will he be okay? Ryan asked. Faced with this question, Dumbledore, who had always been calm, finally changed his expression. He looked deeply into Ryan's eyes, and his eyes were slightly moist. I'm afraid not, child. Ryan opened his eyes wide. In order to be able to attach to him, Voldemort did terrible things to him, very terrible, they formed an evil symbiotic relationship. When Voldemort leaves, Quirrell will inevitably die. Everyone fell silent. For these 11-year-old children, watching someone around them irreversibly heading towards death, even if he is a bad guy, they began to feel sad in their hearts. Children, you sympathize with him and even want to save him. This is a very noble character. Dumbledore lowered his eyes and said kindly but coldly. But when Quirrell sold his soul to Voldemort because of greed and ambition, this was already a doomed result. Leaving the principal's office, several people had mixed feelings. Dumbledore really knows everything, Fred said. Did you see? He is not surprised at all. It's hard to imagine, Ryan said. We are only in the first grade, and we have to experience this kind of thing. War, mysterious people, death. I thought these things should be far away from us. And Professor Quirrell, well, I heard that he used to be very good. They stood at the corridor. Outside was covered with snow, and some little wizards were shouting and playing snowball fights in the yard, including Harry Potter and Ron Weasley. Dumbledore is right, Hermione said suddenly. Wade was puzzled. Huh. Harry shouldn't be told the truth. Hermione looked at Harry with a pitying, motherly look, otherwise, the heavy reality and hatred will overwhelm him. Don't talk about this, Wade reminded. Remember what Dumbledore said, we should try not to think about it, and don't look at that person. It's better to stay away from him. Hermione nodded silently. Michael looked at Wade, hesitant to speak. Wade asked him with his eyes, but he shook his head and said nothing. After returning to the lounge in the evening, Michael avoided everyone and whispered, I thought you would resent Dumbledore. He knew everything, but let the students face danger. You almost died, Wade. Wade suddenly turned to look at Michael. Michael looked at him strangely. Have you never thought of questioning him about this? Vader. Indeed not. The plot he knew clouded his thinking to some extent. Vader knew from the beginning that Voldemort was behind Quirrell's head, and he also knew that no one had died this year. He had a sense of superiority as a traveler and a prophet in his heart, and even had a game-like mentality. When he suddenly discovered Voldemort's secret, he just pretended that he was not careful and did not blame anyone else. At this time, under Michael's gaze, he carefully sorted out the whole thing from scratch, including his own thoughts and Dumbledore's possible considerations, as well as the final ending of these people in the plot. He found that he still wouldn't question or resent Dumbledore. Why? Michael asked puzzledly. He is the principal, he should protect our safety. Then what can I gain by questioning him? Wade asked seriously. Watch Dumbledore repent. Or let him apologize to me. What's the use? Resenting Dumbledore for this will keep us away from each other in the future. Is it dangerous? Michael was speechless. There's no point dwelling on what has happened, Michael. Vader finally said. Yelling at the only person who can protect us, questioning him, and contradicting him are even more stupid. Only by being favored can we be confident. We don't. If you are favored, you should not indulge in venting your emotions. Michael was silent for a long time and asked softly, don't you feel aggrieved? No, Vader said. If I learned anything from this incident, it's that. First, don't place all your hopes on others. Second, those who have power can do whatever they want. Third, when you can't beat others, you have to endure it. That's the way the world is, it's always been that way. Vader spoke sensibly to Michael, but in reality, he was not completely unaffected. Several nights, when he woke up in the middle of the night, a green light representing death seemed to flash in his dreams, and sometimes there was the hideous and cruel voice of a noseless bald monster. In the second half of the night, Wade looked at the stars on the ceiling. He couldn't fall asleep for a long time, so he simply got up and read a book. He began to spend more time studying in alchemy. In the last week before Christmas, Vader finally completed his first alchemical work. On the pale yellow parchment, golden rays of light formed a very complex and regular geometric figure. The inner and outer circles slowly rotated at different speeds, and the ancient magic texts alternately flashed with golden light. Vader could clearly see the path of magic flowing through it, the way the spell worked. He could even vaguely feel where things needed to be adjusted and where materials needed to be replaced. After a while, he felt his eyes were astringent, so he closed them and rested for a while. When I looked again, there was just an ordinary piece of parchment in front of me. After completing his first alchemy work independently, Vader's eyes changed again, and new functions appeared. After being able to see other people's real names and how to cast spells, Vader discovered that he could also see the magic drawings, magic flow patterns, spells used, and engraved magic texts in alchemical items. But you need to concentrate and be very focused to see. As soon as your attention is slightly distracted, that special vision will disappear. That's a good thing, but Vader really wishes his golden finger could give him an instruction manual. At first, he thought that he would be suitable to be an Auror in the future. Nothing about polyjuice potion or human body transformation could be hidden from his eyes. Later, he felt that he was probably suitable to be a teacher. Each student received one-on-one targeted tutoring, and the excellence rate was not 100%, but at least 90%. Now Vader felt that he was probably a born alchemist. But if he had never been exposed to alchemy in his life, wouldn't he never be able to discover that his eyes could see more magical things? During tutoring on Thursday, he handed over his repeatedly adjusted work to Professor Murray. "Oh, let me see, a piece of parchment." Professor Murray put on his glasses and stopped Wade's intention to introduce it. He first slowly touched the seemingly ordinary parchment with his long and thin fingers. Ordinary parchment, with a little mercury, stonefish oil and mountain sage added, it's not a special material. Professor Murray muttered the incantation in a low voice, shaking his fingers slightly, checking the magic circuit on it: transformation spell, association spell, elimination spell, and concealment spell. Very clever idea. He looked at Vader with surprise and sparkling eyes and said, "I guess you still have the same parchment in your hand, right?" "Yes, Professor." Wade laughed, took out a self-bound notebook from his bag, and said, "Actually, I still have a pile of them." Professor Murray smiled. He sat down and thought carefully for a while before writing a sentence on the paper in his hand. "Extraordinary wisdom is mankind's greatest wealth." The strong and powerful fonts appeared on the two parchments at the same time, and the content and position were exactly the same. "That's true." Professor Murray checked again. "The structure of the magic circuit is very stable. Even I can't change it. There is almost no restriction by distance, and information can be transmitted in an instant." He stood up as he spoke, and walked back and forth in the room several times, muttering something that no one could hear clearly, and his eyebrows seemed to be flying. After a while, Professor Murray turned around, strode to Wade, stretched out his hand to hold his shoulder, and said excitedly, "Child, do you know, you will change the world. This is a great invention that can change the world. Merlin, it is more meaningful than all my inventions so far. It's hard to believe that you are only 11 years old. This is a piece of parchment, but it is more than just a piece of parchment. It will change the way all wizards communicate. Why didn't anyone think of it in the past? It is so simple, and so great." Looking at Professor Murray's shining eyes and somewhat crazy attitude, Wade's heart began to beat violently. He resisted not to retreat, his fingers curled slightly, and he almost couldn't help but reach for the wand. In an instant, countless precedents flashed through his mind, such as Song Jiwen, who killed people for poems, and Newton, who suppressed and persecuted other scholars. Wade's heart instantly became alert, as if he had returned to that day. He heard Voldemort's voice through a wall. Dumbledore's calm, light blue eyes seemed to be staring at him. Wade secretly pinched a button-sized bean. This was a safety insurance he prepared for himself. He tried to remain humble and calm, and said with a smile, "It's not my invention, I just borrowed the precedent of Muggle network communication. Without the professor's careful guidance, I would not have been able to make it successfully." Vader certainly knew the importance of phone. But he thought that when the Muggle world already had mobile phones and the internet, there was nothing to make a fuss about when an instant communication device appeared in the wizarding world. Moreover, wizards already have a double-sided mirror that can be used as a video call tool. The advantage of parchment is that it is cheaper, and the spells are simple and easy to understand. It can be said that the prerequisites for its creation have been created by wizards hundreds of years ago. It has been in place for many years, but I don't know why, no one seems to be thinking in this direction. Wade kept a smile on his face, hoping that Professor Murray could understand what he meant. "You can discuss the research results if you want, and share the glory with everyone. Don't fall out on impulse, let alone take action." Otherwise, he would have no choice but to fight back. Vader didn't really believe that Hogwarts with Dumbledore was absolutely safe, and it wasn't difficult to use forgetfulness and the Imperious Curse. But Professor Murray didn't seem to understand. He retorted without thinking, "Why doesn't it count? The American continent existed thousands of years ago, but Columbus, who discovered it, is also called a hero. Dumbledore discovered the dragon, the 12 uses of blood. Haven't people studied dragon blood before? Of course not. There is no shame in standing on the shoulders of giants. The important thing is that you are the first to invent it. Write 2 letters. Vader's racing heart slowed down. He suddenly realized that Professor Murray had no intention of occupying his alchemy results at all. He was simply happy for Vader. It's just that Professor Murray's expression was too extrovert and his eyes were too excited, which made Wade feel threatened. He slowly adjusted his breathing and heartbeat, realizing that there was something wrong with his current mentality. Because of Quirrell and Dumbledore, he now has extremely low trust in the school's professors, and subconsciously speculates on them with the greatest malice. But in fact, Professor Flitwick was gentle and enthusiastic, and Professor Murray had been helping and guiding him since they met. He really shouldn't have doubts like this. Professor Murray had no idea what was going on in Vader's mind. He wrote a few lines and suddenly asked, "By the way, Vader, what is the name of this work of yours? It should have a name, right?" Wade said as calmly as possible, "Yes, I call it Book of Friends." He wrote, "Book of Friends," on the paper, but felt that it was missing a bit of charm, so he wrote, "Book of Friends," in Chinese characters. "What is this?" Professor Murray curiously poked at the 3 words that were as elegant as paintings. "The Chinese characters for the Book of Friends." Wade explained and read it again in Chinese. Professor Murray imitated it awkwardly, thought about it for a moment, and smiled. "Not bad. This can become your unique trademark." He buried his head and continued to write. "Vede, have you applied to stay in school during the holidays?" "No." Wade sat next to him. "My parents have been looking forward to my coming home. On the 3rd day after Christmas, I will hold a small party at home. You must remember to set aside time on that day." Professor Murray said, "I can introduce to you to you very helpful friend." "Of course, my pleasure, Professor." Because of the guilt in his heart, Wade is now particularly easy to talk to. "Also, your Book of Friends is kept secret for now. Don't make it public." Professor Murray blinked and said with a smile, "I will give you a surprise during the holidays." The remaining doubts still lingered in his heart. Wade subconsciously became vigilant and said hesitantly, Actually, I originally planned to give it to my friends as a Christmas gift. If the response is good, just sell it on a small scale among classmates to make some pocket money." "Oh, Vader." Professor Murray raised his eyes and looked at him, as if looking at a young child, and smiled softly. "My child, you are still young, so you don't understand. There are 2 kinds of alchemists in the world. One, people who have learned a little alchemy and work in the Ministry of Magic or various companies are called alchemists, but they are actually just the labor force of capital. The other kind of alchemist is me." He tapped his finger on his chest, then pointed at Vader. "And you?" Vader opened his eyes slightly, surprised. "Do you think this statement is too early for you?" Professor Murray asked as if he could read minds. Vader nodded. "I thought it was just a simple little thing. I have just started in alchemy." Professor Murray smiled and shook his head. "The person who invented the quill must have thought it was just a simple little thing, but we have been using it for more than 1,000 years." He wrote the letter, stamped it with his own seal, and let the owl send it away. Finally, he told Wade, "Small gifts between friends don't matter, but forget it about selling them yourself. Your time should be spent on a more useful place than to be a hawker or craftsman." In the evening, Wade finished making all the friends' books that he planned to send out during the holidays and returned to his lounge. He lay exhausted on his bed, thinking about all the people he'd met here. Quirrell and Voldemort wandering around the castle. Dumbledore, who coldly puts the lives of all teachers and students on the chessboard, is also the guardian of this school. "Don't you feel wronged?" Michael asked him. Ryan said, "I thought these things were far away from us." Fred said, "Dumbledore really knows everything." Hermione said, "Dumbledore is right. The heavy reality and hatred will suffocate him." And Harry Potter, the boy who survived. Ved covered his eyes with his hands and looked like he was asleep. A soft pop suddenly sounded in the room, as if a bubble burst. Ved immediately opened his eyes and turned his head to see the house elf Zoe standing in the middle of the dormitory. "You are here, Zoe." Ved smiled. "Thank you for agreeing to my request before." Zoe whispered. "Ved Grey needs help. Zoe is of course willing to help him. But Zoe has not received the signal, so I came to see him. Because I was not in danger today, Professor Murray is better than I thought." Ved took out a green bean from his pocket and showed it to Zoe. "This is the communicator between them, and Zoe also has one in her hand." After completing the Book of Friends, Wade also made this small magic bean, using the association spell and the transformation spell. As long as he squeezed it hard, the bean in Zoe's hand would heat up. Ever since the chance encounter, With Quirrell, Wade has been thinking about how to ensure his survival. Dumbledore has his own plan, and the professors of the school will not ignore Dumbledore's orders to be his bodyguard. The only ones who can be used and are willing to help him unconditionally are the house elves of the school. Fortunately, he has a good relationship with the house elves in charge of the Ravenclaw Tower. This strange creature can apparate in any corner of Hogwarts, and its magic is even stronger than some adult wizards. Although they cannot disobey the professors of the school, helping a student escape from danger does not violate their duties. So Wade made an agreement with Zoe: as long as the magic bean in his hand heats up, Zoe will come to him immediately and take him to a safe place quickly. Before meeting Professor Murray today, Wade brought the magic bean. He prepared for the worst, but luckily it didn't come to fruition. The house elf looked at him with a childlike clear eye. As Vid Grey said, "Ah," Vid was stunned, sighed, and turned the magic bean in his hand and said, "It's not sad, right? I just suddenly found that my thoughts were a little too dark." He swallowed the word and said, "Should it be called paranoia? I used very bad thoughts to speculate about a professor who was full of kindness to me." "Ved Grey is not wrong," Zoe suddenly said loudly. "Zoe, Professor Murray is a good man, but Wade Grey is right to be vigilant." Zoe nodded vigorously. Zoe knows a defense against the dark arts professor who tried to have a bad relationship with a third-year girl and was sent to Azkaban. Zoe also knows a defense against the dark arts professor who used dark magic on students and was also sent to Azkaban. There is also a defense against the dark arts professor who took advantage of the students' trust to invite him to a party, and then contacted dark wizards to kidnap students and extort ransom. Wade laughed. "He is also in Azkaban." Zoe shook her head. "The wrong spell made his wand explode and he died. It's all defense against the dark arts professor. This position is really weird," Wade complained. "The defense against the dark arts professors change very quickly, and there are many bad people. Quirrell is also bad. Wade Grey must always be vigilant," Zoe said seriously. Wade sighed. "I will." When he woke up in the morning, Wade waved his wand and looked at the time. Golden words appeared. 7 a.m. Today is Friday. They don't have classes in the morning, and most students don't get up early. When Wade walked through the common room, there were only 2 fifth-year students sitting in front of the fireplace reading books. Poor senior high school students. Wade felt sympathetic. He used his wand to conjure a ball of blue flame and put it in a bottle. With this, he wouldn't be too cold even when he went outdoors. Tomorrow Wade would take the train to leave school. He decided to go to the library after breakfast and borrow as many books as possible so that he wouldn't waste time when he went home. After spending a morning in the library, when he returned to the hall, Wade found that Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick were there, busy arranging Christmas decorations, and immediately stepped forward to help. "Ah, Wade, thank you," Professor Flitwick said happily. "We're going to hang all those ribbons on the wall." Several people worked with wands, hanging bright ribbons on the wall, 12 towering Christmas trees on both sides, hundreds of candles lined up, coiled around the Christmas tree under the command of Professor Flitwick, and burned quietly. The tip of his wand also sprayed golden bubbles, hanging on the branches. Professor McGonagall gently tapped the ice crystals hanging from the branches with her wand, turning some of them into shiny little animals or small bells. The students in the hall were amazed by the effortless transfiguration. More students came to help, and they gave full play to their creativity. Some turned into golden stars, some turned into deer with their heads held high, and some made several sleighs run over the hall, showing an excellent level of magic, which made the 2 professors add a lot of points to the college. Of course, there were also failures in transformation. A Slytherin boy originally just wanted to make a few candles, but he didn't expect the spell to go wrong. The tip of the wand suddenly exploded, and his whole face turned black, causing others to laugh. Soon, the hall was completely renewed. Michael, who came downstairs to eat, said tangledly, "You know, Wade, I miss my family very much." But he fiddled with the branches with his fingers, and the ice hamster hanging on it immediately squeaked. "Christmas at Hogwarts seems to be very interesting." He looked like he wanted to stay. "Wade, Michael, you are all here." West, the 6th grade male class leader, strode over and took out 2 pieces of paper and handed them to them. "Come, sign this." Michael took it. "Notice prohibiting the use of magic during holidays." Why should I sign this? I am a wizard. Yes, underage wizards. West nodded perfunctorily and urged, hurry up, I still have to find Anthony and the others. Wade looked down at the notice. According to the Law on Reasonable Restraint of Underage wizards need to pay attention to the following prohibitions during the holidays. First, wizards under the age of 17 are minors and are prohibited from using magic outside of school. Second, minor wizards should consciously abide by and uphold the International Confederation of Wizards Statute of Secrecy. Minor wizards need to know that any magical activities that may attract the attention of non-magical members, muggles, are serious violations of the law. Third, knowingly using magic in front of muggles is a crime and will be warned by the Ministry of Magic. In serious cases, they will be expelled. There are 7 or 8 prohibitions behind, but they all say one thing: no magic is allowed, and no information about the magic world is allowed to be disclosed to muggles. Wade has seen in books about the history of magic that muggles have been hunting wizards on a large scale since the 15th century. Although wizards are often more powerful individually, their social structure is completely decentralized. Wizards need to rely on the muggle world for food, clothing, housing and transportation except for travel, which often exposes their identities. For more than 200 years, many wizards were persecuted to death by muggles. In particular, because wizard children cannot control magic, they easily attract attention and are arrested, imprisoned or even burned to death. In order to protect the wizard community, the Statute of Secrecy was established in 1692 and has continued to this day. It is still strictly observed and is the iron law of the wizarding world. Of course, wizard books only record the persecution of wizards by muggles, but do not record the reasons for the sudden deterioration of the relationship between the two sides, nor do they record the counterattack and revenge of wizards against muggles. Now, I don't know whether it is to ease the hatred between muggles and wizards and avoid intensifying the conflict. Their textbook, History of Magic, is vague about this period of history, and the focus is on the deeds of the weird Wendelin, a very strange and powerful witch who enjoys the feeling of being tied to a stake and burned, and deliberately changes into different appearances to let people catch her 47 times. History of Magic uses this special example to prove that the practice of burning witches is completely nonsense. But in fact, many witches were really tied to stakes and burned to death. Of course, there are actually more ordinary women who were mistakenly burned as witches, or rather, the vast majority of them. Wade looked at the notice. A complex magic circuit appeared on the seemingly ordinary parchment. Under West's urging, he did not have much time to study it, so he could only pick up a pen and sign his name. As he signed, Wade felt that something invisible, like a contract, was entangled with him. Don't think you can use magic secretly at home. West finally warned. Minor wizards have traces on them. Once they use magic, they will be discovered by the Ministry of Magic immediately. Every year, there are 2 or 3 idiots who receive warning letters from the Ministry of Magic. I hope you will not be one of them. The time in school is heartbreakingly short, and the time to leave school comes almost in the blink of an eye. When the first-year students lined up and left behind Hagrid, the few students who chose to stay in school stood by the window and looked at them with envy. But in fact, Wade is also envious of these students. They can stay in school freely for 2 weeks, have almost exclusive access to the library and potions classroom, and can consult professors at any time, which is almost a one-on-one tutoring. Vader sighed. If Fiona hadn't been looking forward to the day he came home a month ago, Wade would have really wanted to stay in school. Of course, it feels good to be home. After being away from home for half a year, the longing and love accumulated by his parents burst out almost the moment they saw him. Fiona hugged him at least 10 times a day and kissed his forehead lovingly from time to time. Ferdinand was a little more reserved, but he touched his hair and patted his shoulders from time to time. During the few months at school, Wade grew 3 centimeters taller. Because he climbs stairs all day long and sits for a long time, he will exercise for 10 minutes to half an hour. Over time, his body becomes stronger and he can even see more obvious abdominal muscles. But all these good changes can only be seen in 2 words in Fiona's eyes: lost weight. Mother touched Wade's face and said distressedly, "Did you not eat enough at school? Just wait, I will prepare a big table of delicious food for you today." She was ready to get to work. Wade looked at the mirror. The 11-year-old boy in the mirror still had some baby fat on his face that had not faded away. He looked a little round, fair and rosy, and looked good. Ferdinand sat next to Wade and asked with a very serious look on his face, "Vede, in your letters you have always only reported the good news but not the bad news. Now tell me the truth, is anyone in school giving you a hard time?" Wade also said seriously, "No, this is true. Ravenclaw itself is an independent college. Most of the classmates only care about ability, not many people care about blood, and I have been in several. I am the first in my grade in every class. Professor Flitwick, the dean of our college, likes me very much, and Professor Murray. He devotes 2 hours a week to teaching me alchemy, and even invited me to join him before the holidays' private party." "That's good, it sounds like you have met some good teachers." Ferdinand smiled. "Are you happy in school?" "Of course," Wade smiled. "I'm very happy." Before Christmas, Wade mailed out all the gifts. When he woke up the next morning, he came downstairs and saw gift boxes piled under the Christmas tree. Fiona walked over to him, hugged his head, kissed his forehead hard, and said happily, "Thank you, dear. I like the gift you gave me very much." Vader gave her a bottle of beauty potion he brewed himself, which was a finished product approved by Professor Snape. Ferdinand also nodded, "A great magic razor. But does the parchment you put in the gift box have any special use?" "This is the alchemy work I completed independently, the Book of Friends," Wade said with a bit of pride. He took out a book that he had bound by himself from his pocket. On the cover was written, "Book of Friends," in both Chinese and English. When he opened it, the top of the horizontal line on the first page was the handwritten word, "family." On the right side, "name," is written in smaller font, followed by a horizontal line. Wade took out a quill pen and gave each of his parents one, and wrote his name on the right side of the pen. "Our 3 friend accounts are related. Write the name like this, and then I write what I want to say here." He wrote a line in the blank space below the line, "Merry Christmas." Fiona let out a small exclamation, and saw a line of words appearing on the parchment in her hand. "Vade. Merry Christmas. Oh, I get it." Fiona quickly wrote her name in the upper right corner, and then wrote below, "Merry Christmas, baby." The same words also appeared on the parchment of father and son. Ferdinand understood. It's like a forum. Home computers have been around for many years, and the price only costs a few £100. Naturally, the Gray family bought one early, as they are all familiar with computers. "Yes, it's like an internet forum." Vader spread his hands. "Because the carrier is just a piece of paper, it seems a little more magical. It can't transmit video and sound. In fact, it's not as good as the internet, but it is not affected by the magic magnetic field, so that you can contact me at any time even if I am at school. To be more precise, Book of Friends is a magical version of WeChat. It's just that nowadays, things like MSN Messenger, WhatsApp, QQ, WeChat, etc. have not yet been developed, which makes Wade's Book of Friends very advanced. I have to say, this is the best Christmas gift I've received this year, Vader." Ferdinand's eyes sparkled. "But what's even better than this is that you really learned something at Hogwarts. I'm proud of you, kid." Fiona soon became addicted to online chat, like most people who come into contact with communication software for the first time. Even if Vader and Ferdinand were less than 2 meters away from her, she would always use the friend account to communicate. Soon, text began to appear on other pages of Vader's friendship book. The second page is associated with SSC members. Michael. "Hello. Padma. Merlin, I really saw what you wrote." Hermione. "Can you see what I wrote too? Oh my god, it really appeared. How did you do that? I didn't see a similar spell in the book." Padma. "Forget about the book, Hermione, today is Christmas, you should be happy." Michael. "Wade, I thought you were just starting to learn alchemy. You should have told me earlier that you made such a great thing." Theo. "I read the instructions and just figured out how to use it, it's amazing. This is the best magic item I've ever seen." Ryan. "I'm so shocked that I don't know what to say. Just write a sentence to prove that I saw it." Neville. "I accidentally fell off the sofa, and my grandma thought I received some dark magic item and almost confiscated it." Wade. "Merry Christmas, everyone." His words seemed to ignite the frying pan, and everyone's messages popped up one after another. They soon discovered that the space occupied by each line of text was limited. It would take about 1 or 2 seconds for each sentence to disappear after reading. At most, only 15 lines of text could be displayed on the page at the same time. The online chat was forcibly limited in speed, so that there would not be a situation where 999 plus unread messages appeared in just a few minutes. In a few minutes, they quickly learned to send emoticons without any guidance, and it seemed that they would not be able to stop for a while. Wade turned to the third page, which was the house elves page. The house elves who had a close relationship with him all received one. They carefully tried to write words on the parchment and wrote many words of gratitude to Wade. Next came Professor Murray, Professor Flitwick, Professor Sprout, Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape. Except for Snape, who gave a barely usable evaluation, and Professor Murray reconfirmed the invitation in 2 days, everyone else praised his wonderful ideas and said that they could also tutor him during the holidays. After a while, the friend account gradually became quiet again, and Wade guessed that they might be busy creating other chat groups. Among the Christmas gifts he gave, of course, there was not only the book of friends related to himself, but also blank parchments related to 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, and 5 people. The professors also added an extra. The stack is for 10 people, and together it is a thick booklet, so it can be called a book. In Vader's vision, in the future, students at Hogwarts will all have a book of friends, and they will exchange parchments with friends or family members and establish large and small chat groups. Maybe Hogwarts will add a school rule soon. You are not allowed to open the friends account during class time, and it will be confiscated if you violate it. Or maybe students will compare the thickness and value of their friend accounts. In order to save face, some students will buy blank parchment and put it in it, pretending that they have joined many chat groups. But Professor Murray asked him not to sell the book of friends for the time being. Seeing that a road with a long way to make money was cut off, Wade sighed dejectedly. Put away the friends list and start opening your own gifts for this year. Among the many gift boxes under the Christmas tree, most come from Ferdinand's employees. Wade has been wandering around the toy factory with his father since he was a child. He is smart, sensible, and cute. Many old employees like him very much. Even though they haven't seen him for more than half a year, they still send him gifts. They gave away various toys popular among ordinary people, exquisite pens and notebooks, children's books, etc. Some of them were gifts given to him by Wade's Muggle classmates in elementary school. These were relatively simple. Most of them were candies, greeting cards and small toys. These are things he receives every year, and of course Wade gives them gifts of similar value in advance. Then came the gift from the wizarding world. Unlike Wade, who sent everyone away with the same gift, the gifts everyone gave him were various books. Professor Murray gave him a handwritten alchemy notebook, which Wade carefully put away and planned to read after dinner. Professor Flitwick gave him a copy of the Encyclopedia of Spells. This book requires the professor's approval in the Hogwarts library before it can be borrowed, and Vader also planned to take time to read it during the holidays. Michael gave a copy of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Hermione gave The Alchemist. Padma's gift was Gilderoy Lockhart's Wandering with Werewolves. Theo's gift was The World's Oldest Man, Magic Plants. Ryan's The Beauty of the Starry Sky. Neville's The Secret of Transfiguration. Perhaps his image of loving reading was deeply ingrained in everyone's minds, and everyone unanimously chose to give him books. It seems that he is quite busy this holiday. Hogwarts. When Dumbledore got up in the morning, even the shoes placed by his bed were inundated with gifts. He has been a professor at Hogwarts for almost a century and has taught countless students. Almost 80% of the wizards in the British Isles are his students. And he is also the president of the International Federation of Wizards, the chief wizard of the Wizengamot, and is recognized as the greatest wizard of our time and the greatest headmaster of Hogwarts ever, although Dumbledore himself is not so fond of these titles and accolades. He cares, but obviously, most people care about it. There are wizards all over the world who want to have a good relationship with him. So every Christmas, Dumbledore would receive many gifts that could almost overwhelm the headmaster's tower. Fortunately, he used the traceless stretching charm very well. So Dumbledore usually spent the entire week after Christmas opening presents. This is an activity he enjoys. Of course, Dumbledore was not motivated by the value of the gift itself, but because he could see some people's growth, some people's desires, and occasionally some small surprises, maybe a curse, or maybe a harmless one, prank. Most people who didn't know him would give him books out of respect for the wizard, Muggle and wizard books, many of which Dumbledore had already read, but still happily accepted them. People who know him well know that this old man is a hopeless lover of sweets. His gifts are often cakes, chocolates, piles of cockroaches, sizzling bees and other sweets, and some of them contain deadly potions. Their process was a fairly interesting game for Dumbledore. There are also some people who, even though they don't normally communicate with each other, still have gifts given on this special day. Even if it was just a piece of paper, a leaf, or a pair of unsightly wool socks that smelled like sheep, Dumbledore would treasure them with great care. Just as Dumbledore was opening a gift box that was half a man's height, an owl suddenly flew in through the window and dropped a small package on Dumbledore's lap. Could it be that someone just remembered him when he woke up in the morning and then gave him a replacement gift? Dumbledore thought like this, put down the gift box, and opened the small package first. There was only a piece of parchment and a long thin note. Dear Albus, this is the work of my student, Vader Gray. I am extremely proud to share my joy with you. Best wishes, Maury. Even the all-knowing Dumbledore was confused by this letter without beginning or end. He unfolded the parchment and looked at both sides, making sure that there was nothing written on it except Moray's own name. Dumbledore was about to use a spell to check it when someone else came to visit him. Dumbledore walked to the hallway, and Phileas Flitwick stood at the door, holding a similar parchment in his hand, and said happily, "Oh, Professor Dumbledore, this is my one. I have to say, I knew he would achieve extraordinary success, but I didn't expect it to be so early. He has only been learning magic for 3.5 months. Wade Gray, Dumbledore asked tentatively. Yes, who else could it be? Professor Flitwick walked away with a brisk step and humming a song. Dumbledore looked down and saw that there was still nothing on the parchment Flitwick gave him except Flitwick's name. Then came Pomona Sprout. I thought, who else can I give this to besides you? The witch smiled gently and said, I look forward to your contact at any time. Then it was Minerva McGonagall. She saw that Dumbledore already had a small stack in his hand, and handed him one with some displeasure. Oh, I thought I was the first one, but Pomona was so quick. In fact, she opened the other gifts first, and when she found this one, it was a little late. The last one was Snape, who handed over a notebook directly. Humph, the potions professor said coldly. I kept my own one, and I don't need the others, useless contacts will only waste my time. Dumbledore, so everyone has one, only he doesn't know what it is. Wait, Severus. When Snape was about to turn around and leave, Dumbledore stopped him and asked frankly, what is this? He raised the parchment in his hand. Snape was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes became a little strange. You don't know. Obviously, I'm not as omniscient as people boast. In fact, I often feel that I know too little. Snape looked up and down at Dumbledore, as if he saw a giant monster dancing ballet on tiptoe. The corners of his mouth curved slightly, as if mocking or gloating. It's really strange. Someone actually gave me a Christmas present, but not to the great Dumbledore. Snape's harsh tone did not change Dumbledore's color. The old headmaster just drew out his wand and waved it at the gift boxes in the room. The potions professor couldn't help but look over his shoulder. The gift boxes swayed slightly, and then stopped. Dumbledore sighed regretfully and said, it seems that there really is none. Oh, Snape responded dryly. He had just seen it. Dumbledore's room was piled high with gifts, almost to the ceiling. Thinking of the few gift boxes in his bedroom, Snape suddenly lost the mood to laugh. In fact, he didn't care about the number of gifts at all, he just didn't want to see other people's unintentional boasting faces. Snape flicked his finger, and a note shot at Dumbledore like a bullet. This is the instruction manual. When Dumbledore caught the note, Snape had already turned around and strode away. The white-bearded headmaster pushed his glasses, then looked down, and soon figured out how to use it. Oh, can it replace the invention of the Muggle phone? Very interesting idea. He chanted a spell and checked the magic on the parchment, or the friend's book. Ingenious idea, genius combination. It seems that Mr. Gray's study of alchemy has begun to bear fruit, and he is very talented, no wonder Murray is so proud. Thinking that he was the only one who did not receive a gift, Dumbledore recalled the expressions of several children that day and vaguely understood something. So that's it. A smart and sensitive child. Is that so? Unlike Harry, this child should not like to be guided by others. He seemed to be talking to himself, but soon, an old, subtle voice sounded in the room. Ralph rarely sees such an 11-year-old child. The voice said, a bit like Albus Dumbledore at the time, also like Tom Riddle at the time, smart, insightful, and different. Dumbledore looked down and said modestly, "Oh, then you have overestimated me a bit. When I was 11 years old, I knew as much about alchemy as all ordinary children." At the point where his eyes fell, standing in front of the fireplace was a very old house elf. His skin was wrinkled, and he was wrapped in a tea towel with the Hogwarts emblem. His ears were full of fluffy white hair. He was so thin that his body seemed to be easily broken, but his big green eyes were very clear. He said in a whispering voice, "Albus Dumbledore is so arrogant. He said this, which means he is different from others and thinks he should know everything." "Don't be so blunt, dear Ralph," Dumbledore said helplessly. "You see me too clearly, and often make me feel ashamed." He wiped his glasses, sat in front of the table, and asked softly, "Help me sort out these gifts, okay? I need to write something." "Ralph is willing to serve, Master." The house elf bowed, stepped back a few steps, and stretched out his slender fingers. The gift boxes piled in the room unpacked themselves, the books quickly got into the bookshelf and arranged neatly, and the clean food jumped into the cabinet, and the cabinet door closed with a click. Various greeting cards and letters fell into several boxes and were neatly stacked on the table, waiting for Dumbledore to check them when he had time. Other items were placed in various corners of the room. As for the problematic gifts, they gathered together and were ruthlessly squeezed and crushed by magic. Not long after, Ralph disappeared from the room with these, garbage, and things like wrapping paper. There were only 2 or 3 gift boxes left on the table that were not opened, only Dumbledore could open them personally. While the elves were busy, Dumbledore wrote his name on each friend's book, Albus Dumbledore. All the professors who stayed in school during the Christmas holidays had no family, and they might not even have relatives. They all chose to give one of their friends' books, which were limited to one-to-one contact, to Dumbledore. So Dumbledore, who did not receive a friend's book as a gift on Christmas, still had a thicker, friend's book, than anyone else this morning. After putting away the friend book, Dumbledore sat at the table and thought for a long time. The light and shadow of the years passed before his eyes, creating ripples in the depths of his blue eyes. Are they similar? Of course they are very similar. Thinking back carefully, the look in the eyes of Weed Grey in the crowd that day was so similar to his younger self. But Dumbledore would never forget how he had messed up his life. After pondering for a long time, he carefully picked up the pen and wrote a letter. "Dear Murray, I have received the gift brought by your owl. I have to say that it is very clever, even great. It is hard to imagine that this is the work of an 11-year-old child. Of course, its composition is actually simple and easy to understand to some extent. But it is even more amazing because of its simplicity. I think you can understand what I mean. I can almost see that it will bring earth-shaking changes to the wizarding world in the future. To be honest, this makes me happy and scared. For such a talented child, what kind of education should we give him? The last time I met such a smart and terrifying student was 50 years ago. You should also remember that student, Tom Riddle. I will not be so arrogant as to think that my personal attitude determines Voldemort's life. But I have to admit that my education of him was undoubtedly a failure. A talented, precocious person, his emotions were restrained by his thoughts, and he was isolated by his own wisdom. Even if he stood among countless people, he was lonely, because his mind and sharpness would make it easier for him to see the selfishness, greed, ugly desires, and paranoid arrogance in human nature. He would keep a certain distance from others, and use humor, kindness, or politeness to disguise his inner disappointment and indifference to human nature. He would be more likely to lose his way than those clumsy children. You know, I'm not just talking about Tom Riddle, nor just Wade Grey. Therefore, I have some perhaps immature suggestions for your student Wade. Dear friend, when we adults face children who are much younger than us, we often become unconsciously arrogant because we have more knowledge and experience. We look down on those children with a sense of superiority, holding absolute power like a monarch, instilling the information we want them to know, keeping the information we think they should not know, manipulating them with words, and guiding them in the direction we want to see. What arrogance is this? What's more dangerous is that we often don't realize this arrogance. Because we think we are making the right decisions to make them better people. I can't say that this is absolutely wrong, because children's thoughts are often immature, and they don't know how to restrain their words and actions. If they are not properly guided, they can easily go astray and cause harm to themselves and others. But for students like Wade Gray, ordinary education may only have the opposite effect. If I have learned anything from my many years of failed education, it is that love is the most difficult and powerful magic in the world. It is mysterious and hard to guess, but it can change everything and decide everything. On Christmas Day, the Gray family had a big meal, watched a musical, and took a lot of photos. The old-fashioned camera used was a Christmas gift from Ferdinand to Vader, and Fiona's gift was a developing potion. This is a camera I bought in Diagon Alley. They said it can also be used in Hogwarts. Ferdinand said with a smile, this way you can take pictures of your life in school. The owner of the ice cream shop in Diagon Alley told me that as long as I use the correct developing potion, the people in the photos will move. Fiona said excitedly, so what are you waiting for? Let's take pictures today. But after taking the photos, they discovered that even a small thing like developing photos required a wand, but Vader couldn't use magic at home. Looking at the disappointed Fiona, Wade suggested, actually, we can go to the Leaky Cauldron and stay for one night, there are many adult wizards there. Even if magic is used, the Ministry of Magic can't determine who did it. Received a warning letter. Fiona was a little moved, but she still shook her head. Forget it, if you are discovered, it will have a bad impact on you. Anyway, you will be back to school in a few days. As she spoke, she became sad. Before Wade left, she was already missing him. Ferdinand frowned and said, Vade, is the accuracy of the Ministry of Magic's law enforcement very low? We can only monitor the use of magic by underage wizards within a general range. As for other things, Vader thought about the Ministry of Magic's performance in the plot that the Ministry of Magic's hips are getting bigger year by year, other things are like not very good either. Don't despise the Ministry of Magic, Vader. Ferdinand warned. There is no law enforcement agency that is not a violent agency. If you cannot face it, it is easy to make wrong judgments. Wade said seriously, I understand, Dad. Indeed, the Ministry of Magic, which he now despises, can imprison Dumbledore's professors in Azkaban and also has the power to expel students from Hogwarts. This power has not been weakened much because of the bloat, corruption and incompetence of the Ministry of Magic. On the contrary, incompetent and corrupt people prefer to abuse their power. The next day, the Gray family got up early because they were going shopping in Diagon Alley today, which was destined to take a long time. Still going to Gringotts to change money first, Ferdinand had already prepared a heavy bag. Those goblins don't like paper money, he explained to Wade. If it is paper money, it can only be exchanged for 20 galleons at most. The amount of coins is higher, but if you use gold, there is no limit. The goblins all very fond of gold. I don't need that much money, Dad. Vader persuaded. Hogwarts provides food and housing, and some students only need 10 galleons a year. That's because they can only buy second-hand goods. They can't buy snacks. They even have to save ink. Ferdinand touched his head. Your shortcoming is that you are too sensible, Wade, sometimes you can be more arbitrary. And aren't you learning alchemy? Fiona shook her finger. Don't try to lie to me. Even if I don't know magic, I know that it will definitely cost a lot of money to learn alchemy, and Hogwarts doesn't do it either. Maybe we can provide you with all kinds of materials for practice without any restrictions. Wade pursed his lips and said softly, Thank you, Dad, Mom, I love you. He has been introverted since he was a child, and it is difficult for him to say, I love you, an expression that ordinary children are accustomed to. Upon hearing this, Mr. and Mrs. Gray were very surprised. They looked at each other and couldn't help but smile. I love you too, baby. Fiona said softly. On the way afterwards, Fiona kept holding Vader's hand tightly. Switching to galleons, Ferdinand left for a while, and Fiona accompanied Vader to Madame Malkin's robe shop. Hogwarts uniforms are all loose robes, and they still fit well even if Vader has grown 3 centimeters taller. But considering that he would definitely continue to grow taller next semester, Fiona decided to order 2 more uniforms for him. I also need a dress robe, Fiona said when discussing the lining style with Mrs. Malkin, just a simple one. The color shouldn't be too showy. Wade doesn't like it. We should get it this afternoon at the latest. If you can't make it in time, ready-made clothes are also available. Dress robe, Wade, who was serving as a clothing display stand nearby, said. Silly question, Vader, Fiona said softly, as if speaking to a child. When you go to Professor Murray's party tomorrow, are you still going to wear the school uniform? Oh, you should have been earlier. Tell me so I can customize a suitable one. Vader actually felt that there was nothing wrong with Hogwarts robes, and the gowns displayed in Madame Malkin's robe shop were very similar to his school robes. Of course, this cannot be said, otherwise Fiona will use at least 1,000 words to prove that there is a huge difference between them. Vader could only keep his mouth shut obediently and listen to Mrs. Malkin say to his mother, "Don't worry, Mrs. Gray, I guarantee that you will get his new robe at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at the latest." Let's take a look at the dress first. Style. Which color do you like? Ah, this color matches his skin tone very well. Your aesthetic is really good. What are the requirements for accessories for boys? It doesn't need to be too complicated or too many, it's noble and elegant, the best. Mom, Wade couldn't help but said. Fiona looked back at her son, sighed regretfully in his protesting eyes, put down the useless but shiny things such as necklaces, bracelets, and rings inlaid with gems in her hands, and said, just choose cufflinks. Well, just cufflinks, nothing else is needed. Mrs. Malkin put away the other things with a smile, without any sign of impatience, and spent a long time with Fiona choosing cufflinks. They finally decided on the dress, and Madame Malkin said as if she suddenly remembered, "My dear, little Mr. Gray can't wear his old shoes with his new dress, can he? Do you want to take a look at our latest dragon skin boots?" Vader stared blankly at the ceiling, regretting that he had not brought a book with him. He was now looking forward to having other guests come in, so that Madame Malkin would be busy. Otherwise, Fiona could spend the whole day here. Suddenly the doorbell rang, and Wade immediately turned his head, only to see Ferdinand coming in with a newspaper. Ferdinand nodded to Wade and asked, "You haven't bought the clothes yet, okay?" "Nothing." Wade couldn't help but sigh. "I'm choosing shoes." It took a lot of effort for him to resist the urge to complain to his father. "Have you taken the measurements?" "I measured it as soon as I walked in." "That's good," Ferdinand said to his wife. "Fiona, you choose slowly, and I will take Wade to buy other things. You have ordered the clothes and are waiting for us at Madame Malkin's place." Fiona waved her hand and said, "Okay. Don't make me wait too long." When Gray and his son went out, Ferdinand said to his son, "I ordered the Daily Prophet, I ordered a copy for you, and they will send it to the school by owl. From now on, you must get used to paying attention to political affairs." Vader nodded. The father and son walked around Diagon Alley and bought other things in less than half an hour. Wade also left the names and catalogs of several shop owners so that he could use Elle to buy the items he needed after arriving at school. Especially potion materials. Hogwarts only provides the most basic ones for free, and rare and expensive materials are only provided in small quantities when taking relevant courses. It is impossible for young wizards like him to practice freely. When they returned to the robe shop, Fiona had just chosen her shoes and was sitting drinking tea while flipping through a magazine called Wizard Weekly. When she heard the bell ringing at the door, she turned her head and immediately smiled brightly. Wade smiled. Before he could speak, he saw Ferdinand, who was walking behind him, striding over. He lowered his head and asked softly, "Have you finished shopping? Are you tired?" Fiona, who had not stepped out of the robe shop, stretched her arms and said, "Yeah, shopping is really tiring. What should we eat for lunch? Isn't there a good French restaurant nearby? How about eating there? Order a foie gras steak and grilled cod." I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.